Welcome to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. So we'll cover the housekeeping first and then move into the agenda. So I'd advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and I'd advise anyone in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies. Do we have any apologies, members? I have an apology for lateness from Michelle Guy.
Lateness for David as well.
Lateness from David Brooks. That's great.
John is going to come in remotely.
Okay, and then we have John Burrows joining us remotely for today's meeting. So we do have a fair bit to get through, members. Hopefully, there's quite a bit at the top of the agenda, just that we do need to clear before the Christmas recess. So I'd just ask for members to work with me to try and get to any decisions we need to take quickly on these items, so we can get to our evidence sessions without too much delay. So Chairperson's Business, item 2. So in your tabled papers, there is a first draft report for the committee inquiry into RSE. So given that is a substantial piece of work in terms of size and scope, I don't think that members will have had time to read that yet. It was tabled just today, so I'm going to suggest that you'll all have some light reading over the holiday period, and then we'll come back in January for a full discussion around how we then progress that report in terms of its structure, proposals, recommendations, and any actions arising from the committee on the back of that. Are members agreed? Agreed. Okay. We also, just to add as a sort of a footnote to that, we have had correspondence from both the Human Rights Commission and the Women's Rights Network Northern Ireland, both seeking meetings in relation to RSE and their evidence they provided to the inquiry. I'm going to suggest that at the moment it wouldn't be appropriate to be taking any further evidence, as we wouldn't be adding any further evidence to the RSE report, given that we're at report writing and agreement stage. But we will have obviously a full discussion of that in January that would allow the committee to discuss outworkings of the inquiry. Is there also from the Evangelical Alliance?
Just a wee update as well from the Evangelical Alliance on some work that they've been doing on the Lost Boys programme, which is relevant, so you'll see that as well in your folder.
So in terms of actions, it may be appropriate to go back to all of those organisations to thank them for their ongoing interest, but perhaps if there are issues they wish to pick up, perhaps once a report's agreed, if they think there's ongoing policy work they want to inform, that we could hear from them at that stage, if we're agreed. Okay. We then also in tabled papers have correspondence that's come in on behalf of the 4 main unions, I think largely representing non-teaching staff in the EA. It's highlighting concern specifically in relation to the cuts, so the price increases for school meals that are proposed to commence in January. There's also, and I'm just going to draw members' attention to it also in tabled papers as they are connected, we do have a quite a detailed written briefing coming through from the EA in relation to all of their cost saving measures that they've agreed, price increases on the school meals just being one of them. Again, quite a lengthy piece of correspondence, so I'm not going to suggest that members will have had time to read that. In relation to the union correspondence, I'm going to propose that we share that correspondence with both the Education Minister and the EA, and to seek clarity on what steps were taken. I'm going to suggest to ensure that the budgetary pressures being faced, and there's no doubt that those pressures are real, didn't impact the least well-off families in our society. I think it's important to try and establish what sort of EQIA was carried out, the outcome of that, and how they will ensure, as they manage budgetary pressures going forward, that families, parents and children, particularly those least well off, are protected from further cost-cutting measures. Would members be agreed on those points? There's one other issue that I wanted just to flag. There has been some material circulating on social media suggesting that these price increases could also have an impact on those entitled to free school meals, as there is a risk that the current amount allocated for each free school meal will not be enough to actually purchase the meal based on the new price increase. That is not something that I have any information on, so I'd want to suggest that we do seek clarity from that when we write to the EA as agreed, because if that is the case, obviously the committee would need to be aware of that if members are agreed on that point as well.
Agreed.
Okay.
Although you would expect that if the price of school meals are rising, that the amount that children on free school meals get would also rise.
I absolutely agree, Deputy Chair. It was raised by Ciara Fitzpatrick, respected academic in this space, so I think it's probably worth seeking the clarity, but I would have hoped that yes, that differential would have been made up, but certainly if there's concern out there among parents, I think it's worth committee getting the relevant clarity on that. So on those items, I think we have agreement.
Chair, could I just come in? I know it's not directly related to correspondence, but it is connected to the issue we're talking about, because the EA has now written to taxi operators and asked them to reduce their...
My next point, absolutely. So we're good to go. So I was also going to propose communications on two other EA-related issues. So we'll pick taxis up first, as they are part of those cost-saving measures, and Deputy Chair, absolutely right to raise it. That this letter that has gone out to taxi contractors and to parents, I understand, who use those services, is definitely causing concern. And I think the two main concerns that are coming through, certainly to me, would be parents concerned about the impact on service. Are they going to see a change in January? That's causing a lot of anxiety. And also from taxi contractors, I'm receiving some feedback that they feel that there may be some bad practice out there, but taxi drivers who are playing by the rules feel that everybody's being penalised with a blanket imposition of the 10% cut. Now, I don't want to express a view on that, because I don't really feel I have enough information from the EA to even about the rationale for this decision, or how they've reached it, what evidence base they're bringing to this about what bad practice is out there. But I would suggest we would be wanting to get urgent correspondence away, so that when we return after Christmas, we hopefully have some clarity for parents. So my view would be around what will be the impact on service for parents, if any, and I think more details from the EA around the rationale on the taxi contract changes. I think the correspondence that we have from the EA around their cost-saving measures that are in tabled papers may deal with it, but it may not deal with it in the detail that we're seeking. So I do think it would be appropriate to write if members are agreed. Yeah. Deputy, do you want to come in that first? Because I know you were looking to raise it.
Yeah, but because first of all, I mean, it's not the taxi companies that are to blame here. I mean, if taxi companies or taxi drivers are getting a good living out of what the education authorities are paying, well, that's fair enough. Anybody would do the same. The difficulty I have is that there have been 2 audit office reports and a PAC report saying that the EA hasn't been able to demonstrate value for money. And when Richard Pengelly and Dale Hanna were here not that long ago, and I asked, arising out of those reports, had the EA identified any efficiencies or wastage, one looked to the other and turned around and said no. And then all of a sudden we have this. And I have to say, I mean, the issue of transport has been raised on a number of occasions over the last few months here, and this seems to me very much like a knee-jerk reaction to what is being said. And that's not the right way to go about anything. There needs to be strategic planning. We're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds here being spent in the EA's budget. And, again, it's the most disadvantaged who are going to be affected by this.
Yeah, look, I think that's it. Danny, did you want to come in before I answer?
It's a part of all of that. It's but the EODIS centres is a real worry for me, because the referral's not going to be there. I have not seen any or heard anything from officials to tell me how it's going to save the money. In fact, if you're going to bring it in-house, I think it'll end up costing them more money in the long run. So I would like to hear the rationale as well to that. It just seems like a knee-jerk panic to me.
Well, I'm going to suggest, members, because it was tabled late today. I haven't had the opportunity to read it. The EA have provided a detailed response on the cost-saving measures. I maybe suggest that we do want to raise the taxi contracts, as that is being highlighted as an immediate concern in the new year for parents, as is the school meals issue. But if we could maybe have that retabled for our first meeting back in terms of the cost-saving plan, so the members can have had time to read that, and then if any specific concerns arising from that, informed by what the EA have told us, I think we should do that if there's agreement. Okay. Yeah. And I do think on the taxi contracts, the Deputy Chair's points around, what are the EA doing to deal with the systemic issue around transport provision to ensure it still meets parents' needs, but that it's delivering value for money, because I don't think we've had those assurances. There's one other issue on EA correspondence, and again, apologies, this is top heavy, but again, this are things that are time sensitive. we received evidence from the EA at this committee that really the end of October was the critical juncture in relation to SEND placements for September 2026. And it was quite clear in the evidence that if we didn't have a clear plan in place and a clear roadmap to delivering those placements in a planned and strategic way, they would be moving into crisis management again. That was the evidence we heard, and I don't think I'm misrepresenting it. We're now looking at Christmas recess and we've not had a further update on placements, so I would want to suggest to committee, if we're agreed, that we put that through as an urgent request for an update on exactly how many schools have agreed to take on placements, and where is the shortfall, where in Northern Ireland are the shortfalls, and what is the plan to address that, or are we now moving into another cycle of crisis, which again feeds into the transport issues. If we're not placing children close to their home, then it drives the transport costs, and it's all that uncertainty that it creates for parents. So if members are agreed. Catherine.
Just a really small point, Chair, on that. It's okay them telling us how many children are placed, but are the places actually ready for them as well? Because we're still going through at this moment in time when we know there's children not.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I suppose, maybe when I use the phrase strategic and planned, that's, I suppose, I'm trying to cover that are they the right places, will they be ready on a full-time basis, all of those things that we've discussed. So is there agreement that this is the appropriate juncture to seek clarity on it? Because I think we're always critical of the EA that these things come too late. That they gave us a timeline, so I think we should hold them to that. So, okay. Final thing from me, and then we'll get into the main part of the agenda. And it was just to note, I had attended the launch of the Queen's University report on religious education in schools last week. A really, really interesting piece of work which looks at where the public in Northern Ireland are on this issue. So there's been lots of views shared about it, but it's really, really, really detailed research with a really good representative sample in terms of the public attitudes on this issue. And I think as we move into a scenario, we know the Minister is looking at how to respond to the Supreme Court judgment in relation to RE and a review of the syllabus. I think this research is so timely, and I think for the committee to get a sense of where the public are at on the issue would be a really good starting point for us to look at it. So I would want to suggest we invite those academics in to present, if members are agreed.
Agreed. Who are the academics?
So it's Rebecca Loader, who we've had at committee before, and James Nelson, both QUB academics. I believe Rebecca has actually moved to a new position at Cambridge, but she has said she would still be happy to speak to the research and if dates could be aligned. Okay, so looks we have agreement on all of that. Item 3 in the agenda, declarations of interest. Any declarations to make in relation to any items in today's agenda? No, anything should arise, just indicate. And then item 4 on the agenda is matters arising. Again, there is a little bit to work through here, so I am asking for members' patience, but also to help us get through quickly. So there's correspondence from the Committee for Finance on the outrun and forecast outrun at page 7 of your papers, and a written briefing paper from the Department on December monitoring at page 59. I would want to just, this was tabled from last week as time beat us in terms of looking at it. We also obviously had the update on December monitoring. So clearly very, very challenging budget position, and it's clear that the allocations from the monitoring round are still going to leave education with a substantial overspend on the horizon. So I'd want to suggest that we write to the Minister that we seek first of all an up-to-date financial position based on the monitoring round, so in terms of where the department's at in terms of teacher pay, EA budgetary pressures, and then also what are the Minister's current plans to bring the department to a place where they're able to live within budget. And also I think an update would be welcome on any allocations received in the monitoring round and how the Minister plans to utilise those. And I would want to add to that, because I think we hear a lot about this in health, about the need to transform health so that it can run and deliver the system more efficiently. I don't feel we hear that so much in education, and I would like to hear what the Minister's transformation plans are to deliver an education system that runs efficiently, meets the needs of parents and children, but is tackling waste and tackling some of the structural issues, potentially around duplication in particular in our system. So if we're agreed on that, or if anybody has anything else that they particularly want to add to that correspondence, or if there are any other issues anyone wants to raise, if we're agreed.
Right.
Good. Okay. There's a written briefing in from the department on the SEND reform agenda and delivery plan at page 3 of tabled papers. Now, the department were originally due to provide the committee with an oral briefing on this, but that's been rescheduled to the 4th of February. So a couple of things really, just content to note the written briefing and add to the inquiry papers, but I just think if members are agreed, I would suggest that through the clerk and her team we do emphasise with the department that we were largely on course to complete this inquiry at this stage, but we've really held off as we're waiting for the department. We can't complete the inquiry without their evidence, but we need them to play ball and to come and actually give that evidence to us. So really, the sooner the better, I think, is the message I would want to be sending out on that, because we've heard from the EA in detail operationally, and I want to give the EA credit on that. They have made themselves available to be scrutinised in a lot of detail on that. So the department's the missing piece in the puzzle here, if members are agreed that we communicate along those lines. Great. And then finally, we have further to last week's decision on the timeline for the GTC-NI bill. There have been tabled, now I appreciate they have been tabled quite close to the start of the meeting time, so I'm hoping members have had the time to read them, and we don't have a lot of slack in time if they haven't, but if all members have had the opportunity to read those survey questions, are we content with the content of the survey? There's two things to be agreed here, and that those go live on the 12th of December. That's the first question, if we're agreed. Agreed. If it's helpful for members, like to say, from looking at the survey, it really is a clause by clause. Do you agree with this clause? I mean, that is effectively the GTC is effectively clause by clause. Do you agree?
And if you don't agree, what change would you propose to the clause? Yeah.
Okay.
Deputy Chair, did you want?
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's just the GTC one we're talking
GTC
about now.
committee bill, separate item.
Yeah.
So GTC NI is that. So we're agreed with the content and that it goes live on the 12th.
Yeah. Great.
One other bit, just the procedural bit, are members in agreement that we delegate the scrutiny of the secondary legislation that arises from the GTC-NI bill to the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Agreed? Okay. Okay. Very lengthy chairperson's business and matters arising. Apologies for that, members. So that takes us to item 5, hopefully a bit quicker. Draft minutes. Members have the minutes of the committee meeting of the 3rd of December at page 66 in their packs. Can I get members' agreement that that's a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Are we agreed? Yep. Agreed. Can I just sign those then? Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay, item 6. Kathy, you were, I think, moving to this proposed committee bill. So there are some insights from the Youth Assembly on school uniforms at page 75, which members may want to take note of. And then we also have a draft survey for the committee bill in your tabled papers. There is a revised version of that with a survey that is tabled, which takes account of the typical questions that would be asked to establish the identity of in terms of gender identity of the person completing the survey, and it reorders certain questions so that they scan better and to avoid any perception of leading respondents in any particular direction. Are members content with that up-to-date survey as drafted, and do they have anything to add to that? And are we content that it also then goes live on the 12th of December with an end date of the 20th?
Sure, there are a couple of things. Now, apologies, because I'm reading off the original draft that are initially, but in the second draft, they're content with the amendments in terms of the gender identity and things like that. Is fine. It's just there's a couple in there that I think maybe overcomplicates it, and the information that we're actually trying to get is just very, very specific, and I think this kind of opens it up and complicates it a wee bit too much. For example, the question 2, I don't know what corresponding question it is actually on the new one, but does your school or your child's school currently allow girls to wear trousers? Do we need that? Do we need to know whether they allow them to wear trousers or not?
So I think I got a lot of advice from people who make surveys, some of whom are in the room, if they want to come up and mention. But essentially it was so that you could make conclusions about not only whether the person responding is a girl or a female, but also whether they currently already have a right to wear trousers. So it would just be kind of stacking your information a little bit in terms of what respondents say.
Okay. It's just when I was.
But if you think it's overcomplicating, I mean, this is what the session is for, for everyone to.
No, and except that was just never like what we really want to know is, do they think that pupils should be allowed to wear trousers? Like that's really all we want to get out of this. I just thought that there was a few of them. To what extent do you agree with the following statements? regarding allowing girls the choice to wear, like the simple question of do you think that girls should be allowed the choice to wear trousers in school? That yes or no answers whether you think they should or shouldn't, and whether it's fair or not fair as well. I genuinely think it could be shortened down to like 4 questions.
Can I respond on
Just,
that?
just
No,
one
that's
other
fine,
point
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
I just wanted to get in is I just looking clarity on it as well, because I think whenever we were discussing it was around the term girls or we say pupils. Is it just pupils as well? So I know it's referenced throughout it about girls having the choice to wear trousers. Should it just be pupils allowed the choice to wear trousers?
Yeah, so the legislative objective was described as pupils, but there was a recognition that when the committee was agreeing its terms of reference that the how we had got here was because there had been so much evidence heard from girls in the committee's previous process. So I think there was a feeling maybe last week that it would be disingenuous not to reflect that this is mainly affecting girls, that that's where the impact would be.
Yeah.
From my recollection of last week, I thought we were going to go with pupils.
Yeah, pupils as the legislative objective, but then there were also, some of the background around that reflected the girls thing. Don't know, did anybody else want to come in on that?
Can I just ask question 8, just what that's about? Should there be any exceptions to allowing girls the choice to wear trousers?
Yeah, so I suppose that's an opportunity for people to say if they think that schools, for any reason, would be entitled not to allow it in any circumstance.
Okay. My view, just picking up on that, what Cara's saying there, is like there's a sort of open-ended question there at the end. Is there anything else you would like to say? Does that not give you the opportunity for that, rather than, you kind of have it in? It seems to me that it's kind of repeated a couple of times. There's a few things that are just complicating it slightly.
Can I speak just briefly on this? So, Kathy, when I first discussed this with the clerk in terms of preparing for the session, I was absolutely, let's just get this cut down, 2 questions in and out, that should be straightforward. I would say I am persuaded that probably a little bit more being layered in there is helpful, because it helps build up the evidence base for your policy intentions, to be able to give a degree of nuance to that. When we're articulating the rationale for our policy outcomes, I'm content, particularly that table about exactly why this is a good thing, that we could say X percentage of respondents strongly agreed that. I think it gives weight to the policy intentions as you would develop them. I'm not adverse to losing other questions in there, because I think there's potential for a degree of repetition. On the point of whether we use the phrase all pupils or girls, I'm entirely open-minded. I think we were quite clear that we felt in terms of the final version of a bill, it may well say all pupils for simplicity and clarity, but I'm happy for the committee to have a discussion on that. So I think David had looked to me, and then I'll bring you in, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, as probably the least enthusiastic about this bill being taken forward, I mean, I do think there's overthinking. This is not an unwieldy survey relative to what you would often see for legislation. I understand it's a short bill, but I think all it does is allow sort of extra data to be brought in terms of what's people's thinking around this. I don't think it's likely to change hugely the outcome, just my opinion of where we'll end up with this. And I don't think there's a problem with allowing people who, whether they agree or disagree and they want to put their reasons why they agree, or others who might want to say, look, I don't think it should be allowed in this circumstance or that circumstance. I mean, there's no problem in trying to field that and get that. I don't see the outcome of this being something that most of the committee will be unhappy with, or that we'll not end up in the same place anyway. I think it's a relatively short survey, and the information will come from it's fine and will help develop the policy.
Just to clarify that, I wasn't saying to take that one out. I actually think we should keep that one in about do you agree or disagree and why. I just
think
give a reason.
Looking through it, all I'm saying is, from my point of view, don't really have a problem. The language, I mean, I don't think we should be afraid to say the word girls, but I mean, if we're talking about pupils, I mean, it's only girls at the moment that don't have the right to wear trousers, so I think it really doesn't matter much either way, but yeah, it means the same thing.
Recommend the language, Chair. So from question 4 onwards, do you think girls should be allowed the choice? Do you think having the choice to wear trousers in your, let's see, question 7, in your view, are there any financial, practical or other reasons why not to allow girls to wear trousers to school? So my view would be, and I'm open to advice on people who know this stuff better than me, I would prefer to see it framed as, do you think girls should have the right to wear trousers in school, rather than, you know, somebody allowing them to have the choice.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, absolutely.
And that's reflected in some of those other questions. You know, it's being allowed to.
Chair, can I just go back to question 2? Just here's what I felt was wrong with it. Does your school or child school currently allow girls to wear trousers and shorts as and when they choose?
Can I just come in briefly here? I have a slight concern members are looking at different versions of this survey.
Yeah,
there's another one on the table. There's a new one being on the table.
Has that been changed to question 2?
No, question 2 still looks like
Still the same? Okay,
yeah.
so
I'm on page 81, is that right?
see that one I read it, is that still there? Worded like that?
Responding as a pupil parent, does the school currently allow girls to wear trousers? Yes, so it's that same allowing thing.
I don't think that is needed really, and I'll tell you what one of the reasons why I think it's a wee bit confusion is because there is schools that for certain reasons a girl can wear trousers. Technically, then you could argue that when they choose to wear it, they can wear it, but that wouldn't be the case for everybody. So it would be you could answer that and say yeah, but it's not really universal. That's what I don't like about that question, and I just think you'd be better off taking it away without trying to overly complicate it. It would be question 2 in the first one, but it's basically, does your school or your child's school currently allow girls to wear trousers and or shorts as and when they choose?
I think this is complicating it because it's not about the school allowing them or not allowing them, it's about the legislation being in place that the girls have the right to wear. So I think that's opening it up wider than it needs to be.
Yeah, so it was just to get the perspective of people in school and who are thinking about it. But no, absolutely, you know, happy to take those revisions. The other thing I would say is just that sometimes when you're surveying, it's you go a little bit more widely than the absolute core proposal, because you just want to have information and make sure that you don't have any unintended consequences of your legislation that might eventuate, you know. So that's really right.
Could I just come in here just quickly to maybe try and bring this to a decision? There's a couple of things. First of all, I think we need to be crystal clear. Everybody's looking at the right document, and I directed it as page 80. But looking at the most up to date tabled papers, I have this commencing at page 124. So I think it is important that we're talking about the same thing, or we're going to be at cross purposes and arguing about things that may not even be in there. So I think it's.
Could I make a general point?
Yes.
Chair, it doesn't actually. It's not in the papers. Given the sort of compressed timeline we're dealing with, I'm slightly concerned, given the length of this survey, it might create more work for the clerk in terms of analysing the responses, and I'd like to hear from her, you know, whether it would create any difficulties for her.
The questions have been framed intentionally to try to capture statistical data, and so there's not a lot of room for, I mean, there are in some of the questions, why do you say that, you know, for someone to give a rationale, but it is easier to marshal, you know, yes or no questions, or that scale of question where people say to what extent they agree with something. I guess when you have free text, that is a bit more difficult to marshal and to summarise, even in reporting. But the colleagues in RAISE and the Bill Office and I have worked on this to try to make it straightforward and relatively simple. But if there are too many questions, you know, that's good feedback from the committee, and I'm happy to take that on board and adapt it.
Okay, so and I think your question was relevant to what I was also going to say. I mean, the concern that I have as well is if we don't agree this today, it's not going to be out till after recess, which is again putting pressure on our timescales. So we do need to agree it today, but I think we need to be we need to be on the same page in the same document. So can I check that
Should we
everybody
get it printed off
that
and come back
everybody
to
is
it a bit later on
I
in the meeting?
think perhaps
That'd
we
be-
need to.
yeah,
I think
that'd
perhaps
be
we need
nice.
to do that.
Okay.
In terms of making sure members are all looking at the correct version. It's on page 124 of tabled papers. Is where I am at the moment. So let's return to that. And we'll make a decision. I'm clear that we have to agree this today, or we put ourselves under pressure that we will not be able to manage with the timescales on this. So,
Are there 2 sets of table papers?
There have been two subsequent table papers, yeah.
Right,
So
because I can only find one.
it refreshes, you see.
You have to re-download it again because you'll download it at a particular point in time, and then they update it. So if you don't download it again, you're looking at the past version of it.
Right.
That catches me all the time.
Yeah, it's up
That's
to you.
beyond my comprehension.
I didn't realise it was as clunky as that, actually. I beg your pardon.
okay. So we'll move on. I think if we can get a hard copy, that will maybe aid the discussion, so that all members are on the same page, literally and metaphorically. Right. Item 7 on the agenda then is an oral briefing from the Assembly Research and Information Service on Transform Ed, literacy, SEN and phonics, with specific focus on phonics. So if the witnesses want to come forward, so we have at page 84 we have the clerk's briefing on the paper. We have some correspondence from academics on the impacts of literacy and SEN of a range of different teaching approaches to reading at page 86, and then we have the RAISE briefing paper itself on phonics at page 89. So this was, members may recall, this was research that we had asked about, as we felt when interacting with this aspect of Transform Ed that it was highly technical and that members did not feel equipped to interpret even the information we were receiving with any degree of confidence. So I would like to first of all just welcome Gillian, Kane and Glenn Williams from RAISE to committee, and to thank you both for the work on this. I have to say, in terms of trying to interact with what is a very technical area, this has been really, really helpful. So I want to really put that clearly on the record. I think everybody in the room has expressed when engaging with Transform Ed in general, it can feel a little overwhelming because there is so much going on in a technical space, phonics in particular. So thank you for the work on this. So I'm happy to hand over to yourselves to talk us through the paper. Keen to leave as much time as possible for questions. So I'm hoping all members have read the research paper. So it would be a brief summary of the headline sort of takeaways from the research, and then we'll move to questions. Gillian, is it yourself?
Actually, thanks, Chair. It's Glenn did all the heavy
No
lifting
problem.
on the paper, so I'm going to pass over to him.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As you said, this paper focuses on a part of the Transform Ed strategy, specifically the phonics method of teaching literacy, and can sort of be thought of as a primer on the topic. Phonics is mentioned specifically in the Transform Ed strategy in the literacy and numeracy section on page 40, which states, notably, the evidence for phonics is extremely strong and the theoretical assumptions and evidence for competing models of balanced reading are weak. And then later on at page 41, it is vital that the teaching of phonics should be explicit and systematic across all schools to support children in learning to read. So today I'm going to talk through, first of all, what is phonics, focusing on systematic synthetic phonics, which is the most common form. I'll briefly look at one of the alternative methods of teaching literacy, whole language. I'll present an overview of the phonics research landscape, so the pros and cons, and demonstrate that while the evidence for phonics is strong, as Transform Ed suggests, this evidence has been strongly challenged, not least with regard to children with SEN. I'll also discuss the context in Northern Ireland and comparative perspectives across the UK and Ireland. So starting with definitions, we can broadly think about a literacy spectrum. It's got phonics on one end and whole language, as I mentioned, on the other end. So phonics, as the name would suggest, means sort of relating to sound. It focuses on the relationship between sounds, which they refer to as phonemes, and symbols or letters, as we'd say, which they call graphemes. There is less focus on meaning or comprehension. It is focused about sound. There are different forms of phonics. There's phonics, analytical or analogy sometimes come up, but the most commonly taught form of phonics is systematic synthetic phonics, which is called SSP quite routinely. And we can break that down to better understand it. So the first part, it's systematic, and this refers to the method of teaching instruction. It should be taught explicitly in a very specific and clearly defined sequence. For example, the letters S, A, T, P, I, and N are usually taught first, and then you will later bring in, more letters or groups of letters to build on the vocabulary. The second part then we have synthetic, and this sort of relates to the decoding of words. You break them down into the graphemes, or the letters, you pronounce the phonemes, and then you synthesize them together to form the word. So to take the example of cat, the child would recognize the grapheme C-A-T. They would be aware that that is K-A-T. They would synthesize it together to form cat, have an understanding in their head of what a cat is. On the other end then of our spectrum, we have phonics, sound related. We have whole language. So phonics is that sort of micro look. We're taking words, we're breaking them down to understand the relationship between letters and sounds. Whole language can be better thought of as a sort of a macro approach. It's about reading whole texts, immersing yourself in literature. The emphasis is very much on meaning rather than sound, and that meaning can be derived from visual clues and from context as well, as opposed to actually pronouncing the words themselves. There is a substantial body of research, as I mentioned, in support of phonics. This includes longitudinal studies, scientific trials, and meta-analyses. They support the effectiveness of systematic phonics, and in particular, SSP. There are more examples in the paper, but to highlight a couple of them here. In 2000, the US National Reading Panel published the findings of its meta-analysis of 38 studies relevant to phonics instruction, concluding that systematic phonics instruction enhances children's success in learning to read, and that systematic phonics instruction is significantly more effective than instruction that teaches little or no phonics. They also stated that SSP in particular had a positive and significant effect on children with learning disabilities, students who are struggling, and children from a low socioeconomic background. The 2006 Rose Report, which would lead to SSP becoming compulsory in England, looked at research from England, the USA, and Australia regarding phonics, stating, having considered a wide range of evidence, the review has concluded that the case for systematic phonic work is overwhelming and much strengthened by a synthetic approach. Now, the weight of this evidence has led commentators to state that there is certainly the perception of a strong scientific consensus, or a widespread consensus, to use their words, within the research community that systematic phonics should be emphasised in the early teaching of literacy, and this corresponds with the Transform Ed strategy. However, this consensus and body of evidence has been called into question. So if we turn to the critics of phonics, I suppose initially it's important to note that these critics are not necessarily saying that phonics and SSP don't work or that they're ineffective. Rather, what they're saying is that they may not work for every pupil. You may leave some pupils behind, or that it may not be as effective as the evidence is purporting that it actually is. So as I mentioned earlier, particularly with regard to SEN, critics have pointed out that pupils with SEN can be negatively impacted by a phonics teaching method. For example, children that have SEN that affects their processing difficulties, they may have a poor working memory. They may struggle then to blend more than two phonemes together. So if you have a word that is longer than sort of 5 or 6 letters, a child may really struggle to put that together. Similarly, they may actually have difficulty remembering which phonemes, which sounds are linked to which graphemes, which renders then the whole application moot, effectively. Children who have difficulty hearing may struggle to actually pick up the differences between certain phonemes. For example, F and V, Th and V can be very similar, and that can lead to difficulties. At a wider sense, critics also claim that phonics, as I sort of alluded to earlier, does not support meaning or comprehension of text. It is very much about just pronouncing the words, and some of the critics have pointed out that phonics has been taught using nonsense words. The child is taught to pronounce words that don't exist, just to sort of prove that the phonics method works and that they are able to comprehend these things. Also been claimed that it's a mechanical approach to reading could be considered boring and therefore will not create a love of reading, which is so integral to students then furthering their own reading ability. And that an over-reliance on the phonics method could be detrimental when it comes to irregular words. The example being yacht. If you tried to pronounce that phonetically, you would be in a lot of difficulties. So we have criticisms effectively of the method itself. Academics have also looked at that evidence base for phonics and cast doubt on a lot of that scientific support. 2 notable pieces of research to call out. Firstly, one that looked at 12 meta-analyses that assessed phonics instruction, so effectively analysing the people who have analysed the support of phonics. And they found that despite the widespread support for systematic phonics within the research literature, there is little or no evidence that this approach is more effective than many of the most common alternative methods used in school, including whole language. The second piece was research of 55 experimental trials and a survey of 2,205 teachers, which claimed that the most robust research evidence from randomised controlled trials with longitudinal designs shows that the approach to phonics and reading teaching in England is not sufficiently underpinned by research evidence. And they actually recommended that the national curriculum policy be changed to reflect that. Now, a proponent for phonics came back on these two papers and wrote their own paper calling them into question, which then led the original authors to write a counter to the counter proposal. And you can see that there is very much a debate going on in the academic literature. I know that Dr. McMurray has written to the committee with papers that continue this debate effectively. Looking at the context in Northern Ireland, as I mentioned, the TransforMed strategy does make specific reference to phonics. It states it should be explicit and systematic. In May 2025, the Minister was asked in the Chamber if the strategy would make SSP the sole mandatory method. His response was that the TransforMed strategy emphasises the importance of phonics instruction but does not mandate systematic synthetic phonics as the sole method for teaching children to read. He went on to say that a new literacy strategy would be developed, and the Department of Education yesterday released their literacy framework. Now, we obviously have not had time to go through that in detail, but on page 43 of that literacy framework, it does state, the Department of Education recommends that all schools adopt a systematic phonics programme in the foundation stage. And while it does draw reference to the evidence supporting synthetic phonics, that SSP, it explicitly states that the department is not prescribing a specific phonics programme. The framework does also emphasise building comprehension and fostering reading for pleasure, which, as mentioned earlier, are two of the things that phonics has been criticised for. Turning to England, as mentioned, SSP is mandated in England as a result of the 2006 Rose Report. The Department of Education's Early Career Framework sets out the expectation that all early career teachers learn about SSP and states that systematic synthetic phonics is the most effective approach for teaching pupils to decode. The Department for Education has also produced a list of validated SSP providers and the criteria for how they were validated. Moving to Wales, in January 2025, following a news report that the queuing system, which is a form of whole language, was being used and leaving children functionally illiterate, to quote the news report, the Welsh Government announced they would make minor changes to their curriculum framework guidance, stating that the statutory guidance is clear that the systematic and consistent teaching of phonics must be a key part of schools' approach to reading. So it's stopping short of mandating, as with England, but it's certainly a key part. Scotland is a similar story. In 2024, Education Scotland produced new guidance for teachers on the subject of early reading, stating the effective implementation of explicit and systematic teaching of phonics will be a key part of the overall approach to teaching reading. They also drew national attention for their use of teaching programmes associated with the 3 queuing method, which again, they estimated between 11 and 20% of students were leaving school functionally illiterate due to this. The article highlighted that SSP was being used in some schools to great effect and quoted the spokesperson for Education Scotland, stating that phonics is a key part of the overall approach to reading, but it is just one approach and it was up to the individual school to decide how to teach reading. In Ireland then, a 2023 review report commissioned by the Department for Education recommended that teachers adopt a systematic approach to phonics, which should be part of a total reading programme. The report makes specific reference to SSP and how it is mandated in England, but interestingly cites one of the dissenting critics that we mentioned earlier and states that phonics should be balanced with aspects of reading for meaning. So ultimately, as per TransforMed's assertion, the evidence for the systematic teaching of phonics is strong, and this has led to SSP being mandated in England and promoted to some extent in Scotland, Wales and Ireland. It is, however, still a contentious issue, not least shown by the ongoing debate between academics in this area. So it is clear that while systematic phonics, and in particular SSP, has a body of evidence to support it, it is by no means a one-size-fits-all solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and credit to you for getting through that volume of material so quickly. Look, this is technical material, and I'm feeling slightly traumatised as having 2 children through the cycle of Biff, Chip and Kipper, I think, is the books that were used in their schools. the phonics experience for parents is not always a pleasure, I have to say, and possibly killed love of reading for a few years whenever it was involved. It can be laborious, but clear there is good evidence there that systematic phonics is an effective way to teach reading. I wanted just to draw out in terms of that issue around mandating it, and I noted in your report the Independent Review of Education did already highlight that systematic phonics is well embedded in the system in Northern Ireland, and actually sounded a bit of a note of caution to say that we should ensure that balanced approaches aren't lost, in favour of going for a very highly mandated approach. So I wondered, do you have an assessment? You might not be able to comment on this, but I mean, is this sort of focus to really bring phonics front and centre into how we deliver literacy teaching in Northern Ireland, maybe tackling a problem that doesn't actually exist based on what the independent review had said, that it is well embedded?
I think we are sort of somewhat unfortunate with our timing in that literacy framework came out yesterday. And I think that probably holds the answers to a lot of questions, not least what you've just proposed, because from a high-level reading, it certainly seems to suggest that it is a structured literacy. They call it a balanced approach, which phonics is one part of. But certainly we would want to go away and read that paper thoroughly, check everything, and then we could sort of provide a bit more guidance, I'm afraid.
And obviously we can pick it up with officials,
Yes.
But perhaps if there's more work to be done, we may come back to you. Well, just on that, I'll just one other question then on this. If we were to move, and in terms of maybe how it looks in other jurisdictions, it's whether this came up in the work that you did, if systematic synthetic phonics is given as the sort of primary focus for teachers, and that is the main delivery mechanism for teaching children how to read, is there a risk if we also say that we need a balanced approach, that teachers could be de-skilled in those other methods of teaching reading if the focus at teacher training level and the messages from the department is all about SSP? Will teachers actually be equipped to deliver that balanced approach if we're focused on that?
So SSP does require teachers to be very specifically trained. I don't think I can tell you with any degree of certainty whether the other methods require such a high degree, unfortunately, of training. I know that that high degree of training is sometimes called out as a limitation of SSP. I don't want to draw inferences then as to what that means for the other methods.
Yeah. Okay. Again, we may pick some of that up with the officials, but once again, really appreciate the work on this. It is a technical area, but one the committee does need to get to grips with. So I'll bring the deputy chair in, then if other members want to indicate through the clerk, I've got John.
Yeah, and it's very similar to what the chair has been asking about, and I've some experience of it myself with my own children, and I know that systematic synthetic phonics is widely used here. But I also understand, having spoken to some teachers, that it's not the perfect, or it's not even a good system for some children. And I think you mentioned it yourself, particularly children with SEN. So how do we combine the use of different methods in the classroom? I suppose I'm asking the same question that Nick asked. How do we do that if it's a class of mixed ability, and some of them, cope well with the SSP, and others maybe with a different? And I think that the term I was told was whole word phonics. As they use the whole language phonics, I think we're talking about the same thing. But if you have a picture of a cat and it's spelt out afterwards or under it, the child is told to say cat, and they understand what it is they're talking about. So how do we blend those different ways of teaching children?
It's a very good question. That particular sort of method of using the visual context does appear to have fallen into what's the word I'm looking for? A poor reputation recently, effectively. The danger being that children will see, cat makes sense, but if they had a picture of a rabbit, and then they think that it means bunny, for example, it is open to the child guesswork, which is some of the problems that's been highlighted with that. I'm not sure how they would manage a blended teaching approach. There, in the paper, is reference to Amira, which is a new trialled AI-driven approach, which from the reading of it appears to be a one-on-one with the child. Effectively, the child would have access to this AI tool that, in theory, should specifically help them regard to whatever their difficulties have to be. Now, that is only being trialled very, very recently. But certainly that could be something, as you said, SSP is not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
Is it possible to find a one-size-fits-all solution? Does that lie down the road of tools such as Amira? Potentially, I'm not sure.
And this is probably an unfair question for you, but for people of a certain vintage, like myself, what was wrong with the old way of learning, how to say your alphabet, you start learning small words like cat, dog, and so on, and then you're able to learn. And I always remember in primary 1, the teacher giving us 3 words, to, get, and her, and then she put them all together, and we were able to say together. So what's wrong, or why did that fall out of fashion, I suppose?
And I think that form is sort of around the what they call morphology, which again is referenced in that literacy framework, that idea of breaking down the word and understanding that if you change the prefix or the suffix, you can change the meaning. If you put on in front of happy, you change, from being happy to sad, and same, you'd recognise in helpful, unhelpful. So I'd say that particular style is potentially still in use, but the system that has really come under heavy criticism recently is that 3 queuing system, which was in use. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well was mentioned for being used, and the criticisms for that were that, as I mentioned, using pictures to aid word recognition take focus away from the words themselves, which lower the chance they'll be recognised in future, and over-relying on pictures leads to accepting errors. Got a quotation here from a academic who said that this sort of particular method was predicated upon notions of reading development that have been demonstrated to be false, a theory that was debunked decades ago from cognitive scientists. Now, I'm not saying that's how you learn to read, and as I said, that morphology sounds a bit more in line. But certainly those particular strands of whole language have seemingly been recognised as potentially being debunked. Although, of course, whole language in general, as the critics of phonics are keen to say, is no, you need a well-rounded approach.
Thanks for that. Thanks for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Had an indication from John.
Yeah, just a couple of ones. Do you see, in terms of children who are starting primary school, increasingly a diverse society, where English isn't their first language, how does this whole issue present itself then?
You may have to bear with me a moment, but I believe in the paper there is a particular piece of research which does say, yes, we are a 2014 3-year study published in England at a primary school did state SSP appears to be more powerful than potential barriers to learning experienced by vulnerable groups such as boys, children eligible for pupil premium, free school meals, children whose ethnicity is non-white British, children whose first language is not English. So there is some evidence to suggest that if English is not your first language, actually SSP is a very effective method.
We have some, because whenever I go around primary schools in particular, see how diverse they are. There's some children who don't speak English at all. So what's the position there?
Oh, I think that may be beyond the scope of what we were looking at here. As I said, the SSP research does seem to suggest that for children who do not speak English, it may be helpful, but yes, I couldn't speak to that.
The other thing is, this doesn't seem to be a black and white issue. You've said that. I do believe in trusting our teachers. I mean, is there a sense that their sort of professional judgment should be valued in dealing with what's in front of them, and actually just using the different methodologies that are best, instead of trying to give primacy to one over the other?
Certainly, you could make that argument. I know that the...
What's your view?
Well, not my view. I'm going to quote some others who have said about this. There was a review of the curriculum in 2021 which described how the curriculum was designed to be accessible, deliberately content light. It allowed schools and teachers to focus on the development of skills which cross curricular boundaries, designed to meet the needs of learners as individuals, which is effectively what you're saying. It gave teachers that autonomy. Now, that was then called into question later in June 2025. there was a review stating in schools where individual teachers are primarily responsible for deciding the skills, knowledge and topics in the curriculum, there is a risk of inconsistent educational experiences across classrooms, schools and regions. Pupils in different schools may be taught vastly different skills, knowledge or topics, leading to disparities in learning outcomes. So that would be a potential danger of leaving it up to the individual teachers within the schools, according to these academics.
Yeah. Well, whatever model you have, you're still going to have discrepancies because you have different levels of ability of teachers, experience, class size ratios, diversity of pupils.
Yes.
I think, as Glenn said, the
putting it on silent.
the literacy framework and there's associated guidelines that were only published yesterday, so we haven't really had a chance to go into those in any depth. But in the guidelines there is there's a diagram on the first page that seems to put SSP right as sort of the forefront of everything, but they do reference other methodologies. So that's definitely something we can go away and have another look at in more detail.
Yeah, I think it'll be good because I think we need to trust our teachers more. The more I go around schools, there seems to be this top-down approach to what actually works best, and often it doesn't work best. Whether it's in what they serve in the school canteen because the children don't like it, but the EA tells them they have to serve it, through now to teaching methods. I mean, it just seems to me it's a one-size-fits-all description against people who actually have the professional judgment to make the decisions. That's my view. But whether you've had a view on that, maybe you don't.
Well, as I said, we don't espouse our views, but the academics do both call out what you're just saying, that there is power in the Northern Ireland curriculum to give teachers that autonomy. However, there is potential downside to that you may have these educational disparities.
Okay, thank you.
Both, Danny?
This will be a small question. Is there a danger within Transform Ed that it just goes down to one method rather than having that diversity of methods?
I think we would, I suppose first thing to say is Transform Ed is quite a broad strategy, and a lot of the frameworks within there are constantly being developed, as I discovered yesterday when this literacy framework was brought out. As I mentioned, having had a quick look at that literacy framework, it specifically says we are not prescribing one method of phonics. We do think phonics should be recommended, but we're not prescribing a specific method. And it does also balance that with the importance of fostering a love of reading and a importance of understanding meaning and comprehension, which would traditionally maybe sit somewhat outside of the phonics method. So, sorry, because your question was effectively, is there a danger in doing just this one thing? It appears that is not the direction we are travelling in.
Yeah. Was proof for being the pudding?
Annie and Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. It's really interesting and really technical, and it's funny knowing how we were educated in schools, a completely different system when I was growing up. It's just a question around in the research that I talked about. It can be a really effective tool, phonics, to give children the ability to decode language and encourage them to read. But there is that trade-off. Oftentimes it's not teaching them about comprehension and meaning of words. Can you just share a little bit more about that so we can have a better understanding?
Yes, I mean, I think you've effectively hit the nail right on the head, which is that it focuses on comprehension and meaning. When you read the word cat, the child understands that I know what a cat is, I've heard that word, it is there. If the child reads the word soporific, which they will be able to pronounce phonetically, but they will not know what that word means, because you could argue that phonics does not enable you to do that. That's where the whole language approach on the other side focuses on the rich literature to pick up meaning from context clues, potentially from visual aids, as we spoke about earlier. And certainly the framework does seem to be suggesting it is something of a potentially meeting in the middle. You know, we have this phonics approach helping to decode, but we're also encouraging this focus on comprehension and meaning. Now, we would have to go away and read up how they say they're going to do that, but it is in there. You know.
Was it 2007 they integrated more phonics into the education system? Or what year here? Because I know there was a change, I think, around 2007, just when I left primary school, they had... But, yeah.
I'd have to go back and find the number.
Back in time. Rings the bell.
Yes.
But no,
that's
that's fine. No, I was reading an article recently about you know, are we becoming a post-literate society? And right across different countries, I think it was 13 countries they had studied, they saw less people reading and comprehending materials. So it just feeds into what we're talking about today. But no, that pretty much answers my question. Thank you very much.
And also, I should probably say that the framework that was published yesterday, it announced the literacy strategy, so that's coming down the track too. So a lot of these ideas probably aren't fully formed in what's been published so far.
And thanks for making us all feel really old early.
Thanks,
From primary school in 2007. I think I left primary school in 82.
I'll tell you.
We were in the same class, you know.
You wouldn't believe it.
I was held back constantly, you know, for 20 years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't have any other indications. I suspect that, as you've referenced, that this is definitely a picture it's moving in real time. So we will, the literacy strategy has been announced, and we may well have more for you to look at as that comes forward. And look, the Transform Ed agenda in general, there's an awful lot going on at the one time.
Not a question because I have. That's going to just say thanks very much, because any of us who've had meetings away from the committee around this, it's very, very difficult at times to get your head around and intense. So it's been very useful in trying to sort of summarise that. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. I've had meetings on this where having your research paper in front of me would have helped me understand what anybody was talking about. So that's been helpful. But look, thank you for your time, and no doubt we'll be in touch again. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you.
When you have children who are learning through this method, as parents, did you get any insight
Nightmare.
into? Yeah, I was going to say, is there anything given to parents to help walk their kids through a completely different system?
Oh, it's the
Yeah.
kids who taught me,
Yeah.
you know, the pronunciation. So he said, it's not C-A-T, it's K-A-T.
A lot of schools actually, I remember going into my daughter's school and they do classes for the parents
Oh,
to try if it's
wow.
your first time going through it.
Yeah.
But it is extreme to try and switch your brain around from how you learnt
Yeah.
to that is difficult, but you can see how it works
Yeah.
as well.
There is a genuine issue there. Yeah, I know schools do often offer that, parents to come in to do this is how we teach reading.
Yeah.
But if the parents don't take that up, then that places the child at a disadvantage in terms of their parent doesn't understand the
That's
teaching
an
method.
additional
So
disadvantage, yeah.
it's not. There's no doubt. There seems to be evidence it's an effective method. To say it's a pleasure working through that method, or might not. Agree.
It is part of our job, don't get me wrong, but it's very hard for us as generalists to step into a place that's so fiercely debated among specialists. You know,
And I think this is the challenge with Transform Ed. I think almost every aspect of it there's a significant and substantial academic debate around every single one of those 10 actions in the plan. So it's contested space for sure. Okay, so I think we're just getting the papers on the committee bill through. I'm going to suggest we do move on, just in the interest of not keeping witnesses waiting. I would suggest we move on to our briefings, and then we'll pick that up at that stage. So that moves us on to item 8 on the agenda, and that is an oral briefing from the Department of Education officials. Now, I just want to preface this with, we have 2 briefings where there is a bit of crossover. So the qualifications reform, which comes in at item 9 in the agenda, does sit under Transform Ed, but there was appetite in committee to get a detailed look at that in isolation. So members may want to hold off detailed questions on qualifications reform until that aspect of the briefing, but appreciate there are crossovers potentially there, so it's just to flag that. But for this item in the agenda, I would refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 115, the Transform Ed strategy, which is set out at page 116 of your packs, and then a briefing paper from the department, which is in your table papers. So the officials, if they're ready to come through. Hi. So while everybody gets settled, I'll run through the officials we have, and as usual, any errors or changes in job titles, let me know. It's a big panel today. We've got Dr. Suzanne Kingon, Deputy Secretary of Policy, Delivery and Infrastructure within the department, Cynthia Currie, Director of Teaching and Learning Excellence in the department, Peter Hutchinson, Head of the Independent Review, Transformation in the department, Karen McCullough, Director of Qualifications 14 to 19 Strategy and Youth Work in the Department of Education. So I know some members maybe aren't at the table at the minute, so I don't know if people want to come in, they can, but maybe you can help us, Suzanne, in terms of...
Karen and Jonathan are going to join us. The panel will
For
change
the-
over for the second
the next
session,
briefing.
Qualifications Chair, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. So we'll really hand over to yourselves at this stage. So for initial presentation of up to 10 minutes. I appreciate this is a big policy area with a lot going on. So it's really, if we can, try and keep to a short presentation to allow time for questions, but I appreciate there are technical aspects of this you may want to cover. So I'll hand over to yourselves for the initial presentation at this stage.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. I'm very grateful for the opportunity today to provide you with a briefing on the Department's flagship education strategy, Transform Ed NI. The background to Transform Ed lies in the Department's response to the independent review of education. In considering that review, the Minister indicated that alongside the critical executive-wide priorities of special educational needs reform and early learning and childcare, he wished to pursue a core focus on a number of areas to strengthen the foundations of our education system. In particular, curriculum, assessment, qualifications, tackling educational disadvantage and school improvement. All of these areas are to be underpinned by increased investment in and a more coherent approach to teacher professional learning and leadership development. The Transform Ed strategy launched earlier this year in March and was quickly followed by a detailed delivery plan published in April, setting out timescales, key actions, costs and delivery partners. Formal programme structures have been put in place with a programme board, monthly checkpoint meetings, risk register and communications plans. A range of engagement and advisory structures have also been established. This includes an international ministerial advisory panel with representatives from Australia, New Zealand, the Republic of Ireland and England. This sits alongside a local academics group providing critical insight rooted in research and evidence, and primary and post-primary principals panels giving school leaders a direct voice in policy making. As the committee may be aware, we've recently held 5 Transform Ed roadshows across Northern Ireland, attended by over 750 school leaders. So why is the Department prioritising these core areas? Firstly, education research is clear. High quality teaching and learning are at the heart of driving educational improvement. Secondly, these areas have received limited focus and limited investment during the past decade in Northern Ireland. All now need reflection, evaluation and improvement. The Transform Ed strategy aims to provide a series of coherent and evidence-based actions to improve education delivery in each of these areas. Our reform agenda is shaped by a number of core principles that are common across high-performing countries, and these include investing in high-quality early years education, designing school curricula for mastery by aiming for depth of learning as well as breadth, slowing the pace, concentrating on fewer topics but in greater depth, developing a growth mindset culture, emphasising effort and improvement over innate ability, early identification and support, intervening quickly when students fall behind, strong teacher preparation and development through investment in rigorous training and ongoing professional learning, developing a collaborative professional culture to encourage teamwork, lesson study and peer observation among teachers. Top performing systems internationally also combine school autonomy with support rather than sanctions to ensure high quality long-term school improvement. Above all, as the committee will know, good teaching is the most important feature of all successful education systems, and it's a critical, most important factor in improving outcomes, in particular for pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. So as a system, it's really important that we start this journey of reform with an honest understanding of where we are now as a system. Our education system is under significant pressure. In recent years, we've experienced real-term budget reductions, an ageing school estate and increasingly complex pupil needs. The legacy of COVID-19 continues to affect attendance and engagement, and the demands on schools have only grown. Teachers and school staff are carrying heavier workloads than before, often stepping in to fill the gaps left by other services. Workloads have grown and expectations have risen. We cannot, as a system, continue to rely on the extraordinary efforts of our teachers alone to hold the system together. Our curriculum is now 17 years old. It has not kept pace with what we now know about how children learn or the knowledge and skills they need. We lack a strong, coherent assessment system that reflects the full range of pupil achievement. And crucially, we have not invested in our workforce. Professional development has been underfunded, and systematic support for teachers and school staff around professional development has been missing. This is not sustainable, and if we want to deliver excellence in education, we must build a system that supports our educators through excellent professional development. The Transform Ed strategy is part of the department's response to these challenges. It acknowledges the challenges openly and sets out a clear, ambitious plan to review, evaluate and improve key aspects of our system. At its core, as I've said, is a commitment to investing in and supporting teaching and learning. Transform Ed also reframes a discussion about educational standards in Northern Ireland within the wider international context. The document sums it up in the statement that many countries in the world are improving their school systems faster than Northern Ireland and have smaller gaps between the more and less affluent. We have many strengths on which to build: a highly qualified teaching workforce, outcomes for school leavers have been improving, and international studies show that we are performing strongly in literacy and numeracy at primary level in the Pearls and Timms assessments. Our PISA outcomes, however, show an education system that has stagnated in recent years. Our outcomes continue to be strong in reading, but we are now only average in both maths and science in PISA 2022. Outcomes were significantly lower than in 2018 in both reading and maths. Critically, our outcomes are now lower than both the Republic of Ireland and England across all three areas of PISA, reading, maths and science, and they've both overtaken us during the last decade. And as in many systems internationally, there remains that strong correlation in Northern Ireland between socio-economic disadvantage and educational outcomes. The gap is closing, but too slowly. Notably, there are significant variations in outcomes between schools with similar levels of disadvantage. What do we mean by that? Some schools with high concentrations of disadvantage perform very strongly, others do not. Some schools with low concentrations of disadvantage perform strongly, but others poorly. Action short of strike has left us for many years without either inspection data or effective measures of system and pupil performance throughout primary school and Key Stage 3. And this does make Northern Ireland an outlier in being without really basic performance data in how our children are performing in literacy and numeracy. The data from teacher-based end of key stage assessment, reintroduced last year, indicates that our teachers believe 3 in 10 children are not at the expected level in literacy and numeracy, and there's a 20% by the end of primary school, and there's a 20% gap between pupils on free school meals and others. It's really important that we have these conversations and a shared understanding of the current strengths and weaknesses of our system. Each section of the Transform Ed strategy contains commitments to a significant number of actions. I won't work through these individually, but would highlight that the strategy is accompanied by a 10-point plan for educational excellence. And the 10-point plan aggregates all of the actions within the strategy into 10 strategic commitments that aim to give a coherence and clarity to the overall plans. The 10-point plans aims to learn systematically from the most effective school systems internationally and to tackle some of the weaknesses I've identified in our system. The 10 actions are as follows: review and redesign of the Northern Ireland curriculum, investment in high quality professional learning, investment in high quality curriculum resources, new literacy and numeracy strategies, and a new school improvement policy based on international best practice. A new system of attainment measures for end of key stage assessment, a comprehensive review of qualifications, an integrated approach to tackling disadvantage within our schools, families and communities, new legislation to ensure that all learners remain in education or training until age 18, and a coherent accountability framework for education. And you can hopefully see that all of these actions are interlinked. Effective education systems are marked by coherence, in which all aspects of the education system are well aligned. This means not only within and across subjects in the form of clear learning progression, but a wider coherence across curriculum, assessment, qualifications and professional development. And that is what we are trying to achieve with the current approach. So if I may bring the committee's attention to a little detail on some of the key areas. If we want to build a better future for our children, we must begin by investing in those who shape it, our teachers. And at the heart of Transform Ed is this renewed commitment to teacher professional learning. Over half the actions within the strategy are directly related to professional learning. And this clear recognition that high quality teaching is a cornerstone of all improvement. Our focus is to ensure that teachers, from initial education, through induction for beginning teachers, right through to leadership development, have the support and resources they need to thrive. And we've already rolled out a significant range of programmes. An initial teacher education bursary scheme aimed at tackling shortages in critical post-primary subjects and in the Irish medium sector. An expanded induction programme for beginning teachers in the first year of their career. The Transform Ed Teacher Professional Learning Fund, a £31 million investment over 3 years, which provides school with dedicated per-teacher funding to support high-quality, evidence-based professional development. Over 1,000 schools submitted professional learning strategies to receive this funding. 145 of our 190 post-primary schools are participating in the online Teacher CPD Academy, and the procurement for the primary programme is just completing and will commence in January. Over 6,000 teachers in Northern Ireland have benefited from this programme. And to complement this, the Making Best Practice Common Practice programme is enhancing access to educational research for our workforce through Science of Learning newsletters, quarterly research publications and practitioner-led conferences. We've provided funding for over 100 schools to host 50 research-informed conferences, bringing together practitioners, researchers and school leaders to share what works. Over coming months, we will turn our attention to leadership development to ensure a strong pipeline of future school leaders, with new programmes for middle leaders, experienced principals and a new PQH programme for those aspiring to headship. And I believe together these actions signal our commitment to career-long learning. We are investing in the future of our children and young people through investing in the teaching workforce. And after years of limited progress in this area, we are making real strides in strengthening our professional development offer. The other area I would like to particularly focus on for the committee is curriculum reform. Lucy Crane's strategic review completed in June was very clear that Northern Ireland needs a new statutory curriculum framework. The current framework is too high level and it lacks clarity about the essential knowledge and skills that pupils should acquire at each key stage. This ambiguity about sequencing and content drives curriculum overload and excessive workload for teachers who have to plan the curriculum for each lesson. Greater specificity of the curriculum will lighten the burden for teachers and reduce inconsistency between schools. Every child deserves a curriculum that is well sequenced and knowledge rich. Deep understanding and critical thinking rest on firm factual foundations. When pupils have that foundation, they can make connections, engage with complex ideas and apply their learning meaningfully. And this is especially important for tackling educational disadvantage. In terms of the curriculum review, subject working groups have now been established to draft the new curriculum, and the new framework will be developed over coming months, and there will be a full public consultation in the spring. Implementation is planned for September 2027, and it will be carefully managed, sequenced and supported by high quality resources and training. So to conclude, Transform Ed is a bold, ambitious strategy unapologetically focused on excellence and equity in education. It represents a long-term commitment to meaningful change that is paced, supported and shaped by practitioners across the system. We understand that the success of our system is shaped not by isolated actions, but by many connected factors. And a transformational change, it requires a system-wide approach. And that's why the Transform Ed 10-point plan sets out key connected actions. We are looking at curriculum, assessment, qualifications, school improvement, tackling educational disadvantage and teacher professional learning. Above all, Transform Ed is not about quick fixes, but rather building a coherent, resilient education system for Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we are a little up against it in terms of time. It was maybe a slightly longer presentation than anticipated. So again, if I could ask members to really try and to keep their inquiries succinct, really clear, straight to the question, and for witnesses to get to succinct answers. If I could ask members just to begin indicating through the clerk, and then we can go through that once I've finished my questions. So there's an awful lot going on, huge amount going on. How much does it all cost?
Yeah. So the budget for this year, the initial budget that was set was 13.7 million. In recent weeks, we have done a comprehensive review of the Transform Ed programme due to the overall position within the education budget, and we've identified savings there of £1.6 million, which have been returned to centre for use across the education budget. Just to give you an idea of the percentage of the budget, Transform Ed accounts for 0.36% of the overall education budget. So it's a £3 billion budget. The spend this year is just over 10 million, 0.3%.
A lot of the budget goes on things that you've no control over, staffing costs and all of that. So in terms of the budget that you have discretion over, in terms of what you can spend, that is a discretionary input, what percentage would it sit at on that?
So I think it's important to be clear that elements of the Transform Ed budget, Chair, are not discretionary. So, for example, a significant area of spend would be on statutory requirements around key stage assessment, statutory requirements around computer adaptive assessment as well. Our qualifications requirements, for example, there's a legislative requirement on SIA to regularly review qualifications, so it's not the case the Transform Ed spending is all discretionary, so have to be clear about that. Can't actually give you a breakdown of the percentage it is of discretionary spend, but to be very clear, elements of Transform Ed are contractual now, elements are statutory, and elements, yes, are discretionary. Much of it's already been allocated to school budgets.
Those that are contractual, obviously, that's a choice to have made them. So, but in terms of the budget over then, the remainder of the mandate, so looking at the next financial year, sort of running to that on that cycle, how much then in the year ahead do you anticipate to spend?
So we're going to do a further. The budget, as you know, hasn't been set for next year. So over
deliver this, how much do you need?
How much do we need to deliver it? So the approximate estimations would be that it would rise to about 20 million next year and 25 million in year 3.
I think we've had some discussions earlier in committee around just the critical budget pressures that we're looking at, and we're looking at interventions in terms of impacting the cost of school meals and UTAS provision, and we've heard about how the local impact teams, the key intervention to transform SEN provision, aren't properly staffed and probably won't be. That the SEN reform agenda is huge costs, not costed, but we're told that they're huge costs. Sort of 13 million rising to 25 million. Are we comfortable that this is where the money's needed in the system in terms of those pressures that just affect school buildings being watertight, SEN children being able to get the education they need, delivering the SEN transformation reforms, but whatever those issues might be, those critical issues that principals raise just as they're firefighting every day, is this what's needed?
Yeah, so absolutely it is, Chair. I suppose just to be clear in terms of schools of status, you'll know that's capital funding. The education capital budget is close to £400 million per year, but it's a separate funding stream. So the money that's spent in Transform Ed isn't capital funding, it's obviously resource funding, so they're separate pots of money. In terms of SEN, just to give you some idea of the scope and scale, we predict that by 2027-28, SEN will require 1 billion of a 3 billion budget. So I'm thinking that 0.3% of the overall education budget, 20
Wouldn't
million.
want to be casual about 25
I
million,
absolutely
no.
wouldn't. I'm not being casual. These are crucial and important areas. They are statutory requirements. I think it's extremely important that our children are taught the right thing. Curriculum is the backbone of everything that happens in the classroom. As I reflected in the presentation, the quality of teaching and learning is the biggest single factor that influences the quality of any education system, and every study will tell you that, from OECD, McKinsey and others. No education system will exceed the quality of its teachers. Every pound invested in professional development has a payback, I think, of around £10. So I absolutely believe that these are essential things to be spending what is a small proportion. That's the point I was trying to emphasise, a very small proportion of the overall education budget. In other areas, as I said, it is statutory. So for example, statutory key stage assessment, it's a legal requirement. We haven't had arrangements in place due to action short of strike. We've worked with practitioners across the system for revised arrangements that are low stakes for schools, low stakes for pupils, through assessments developed by SEA. We need to fund that, and it is a legal statutory requirement.
I suppose I just wondered, I think, the costs of this do cause me some concern, just because I think that we have to be confident that the interventions are the right ones. Again, and I prefaced my question with there is an awful lot going on, and I have to be honest, trying to scrutinise this I think is quite difficult, because it feels overwhelming, the amount, and so if I feel overwhelmed by it, I can't imagine how teachers feel.
Delivering it's also somewhat overwhelming.
I imagine, and I think that perhaps speaks to a concern. It feels to be an awful lot is happening extremely quickly. We're already well aware of pressures around teacher workload. We're aware of the budgetary pressures, which creates their own pressures within the school system. And it feels to me that this is happening at such a pace that there are concerns that we may rush into delivering things that we're not confident actually have the buy-in of the system. Curriculum review being one of them. And I'm not going to focus on it in detail. I mean, when I'm aware in some of those working groups, there are real concerns about just how quickly the focus is narrowing into really quite prescriptive and mandated territory. But I'm not wanting to go into curriculum at this stage. One of the issues that is raised repeatedly in relation to Transform Ed, both in terms of media reporting on this, when I speak to teachers, when I speak to academics, they say this feels like lifting a particular brand of educational philosophy championed by Michael Gove. We've got a lot of people who were involved in those reforms very closely, who are now very much involved in our education system in relation to this, in terms of their advisory rules being lifted and superimposed on the system. Yeah. Is there any validity to that? Is there any connection to Gove reforms? And are the people from England involved in advising and developing this? You were shaking your head. Are you saying they had no connection to the Gove reform agenda?
I'd like to just offer a few reflections. We'll talk personnel, but we'll offer a few reflections. Just to be clear, there are significant big picture differences between the Gove reforms. So the Gove reforms were focused on two key issues: structural change and accountability. Just to be really clear, Northern Ireland, Transform Ed has been developed in Northern Ireland for Northern Ireland. Its focus isn't on structural change and accountability, but capacity building and professional growth.
Accountability is in there in Transform Ed, and knowledge-rich curriculum, accountability, those are things I'm seeing.
Knowledge-rich curriculum is accountability review, but this is
that's in there, yeah.
If I can, high stakes accountability, which judged schools heavily on exam results and league tables, creation of academies and free schools, performance management tied to school outcomes, the three key pillars of the Gove reforms. To be clear, in Transform Ed, there's no emphasis on high stakes accountability. So there's an accountability review, but all the accountability is low stakes. If you look at what we've done for statutory assessment, the outcomes aren't even being published at school level. There's no structural overhaul like academisation. Half the actions in Transform Ed, as I said earlier, focus on professional development, on coaching, mentoring, CPD. The goal in Transform Ed is to improve classroom practice and empower educators using research around cognitive science and pedagogy, and it invests in teachers for that sort of long-term improvement. The main similarity between the Gove reforms in England and the approach that we're taking in Northern Ireland is, as you've mentioned, the knowledge-rich approach to curriculum design, and would like to just reflect on that. That isn't just an England, Northern Ireland, it's part of an international movement around the clear importance of deep, secure knowledge in education. And you see it in countries like Australia and New Zealand. I'd like to draw your attention particularly to Scotland. There's been significant issues in their skills-based curriculum for excellence, and in their latest curriculum improvement cycle that's being piloted currently, they have explicitly positioned the role of subject-specific knowledge right at the heart through the know, do, understand framework. The other piece I want to make, just very briefly, is that knowledge rich isn't a party political issue in England. And just to be really clear on that, I want to talk about the Francis Review. It concluded that the knowledge rich model needed to continue. That's been endorsed by the Labour government. Becky Francis concluded, and just read it, subject specific knowledge remains the best investment we have to secure the education of young people in a world of rapid technological and social change. The review's really clear in England, the Francis Review, that they need a knowledge-rich model, that it advocates for teaching fewer things in depth and for the very careful sequencing of the curriculum. So it's not a party political. Knowledge-rich has been embedded in England and it's accepted across the political spectrum. Also, I'd emphasise our education systems are at very different starting points, England and Northern Ireland. In particular, England had a significant issue around their teaching workforce. Huge problems with recruitment and a lack of subject specialists. We have some issues, but at primary, for example, we continue to have an oversupply, and we have a highly qualified teaching workforce, which England haven't got and don't replicate. That makes the context extremely different. Our focus, long-term sustained improvement through professional development.
Just briefly, because I'm conscious other members will want to come in, that there's huge levels of scepticism in the system around this, and you must be aware of that. I know the Minister's been quite clear to say everyone who goes to a conference on this says it's brilliant, but certainly my engagement with teachers is they're concerned that it's an overwhelming volume of stuff that is coming forward. And there is concern at academic level around the philosophical and academic research basis that underpins all of this. And I just want to get a sense, are you engaging with any of those concerns? Because my understanding is there's really, you mentioned the local academics forum, but my sense is everything that's providing the philosophical underpinning from this is coming from England, and it's coming from outside jurisdiction. There's been a lot made of the international emphasis on this. I mean, I'm not aware that our local academics have been involved in shaping this plan, in providing any of the research base that informs it. They certainly don't seem to have been invited to have had input in the CPD. That went to just a direct award to the InterDrive contract, but it was a direct award.
That's one small aspect, Chair, and the £31 Teacher Professional Learning Fund has went to schools, and Stranmillis in particular has been involved in that.
Finished. In terms of the local academic input into this, I mean, why is there so little in terms of shaping the whole structure and underpinning around this when we want a Northern Ireland specific response that works for Northern Ireland, not something lifted from other jurisdictions?
I think, Chair, we have to be really careful that we are balancing input from local practitioners, local academics, but also I think it would be a mistaken position to think that Northern Ireland doesn't have anything to learn from other systems internationally. When we see, for example, in PISA that we're average in reading and maths, why would we not look more broadly at other jurisdictions that are outperforming us? Absolutely, it's not a focus on England and England only, and it is a focus on trying to combine the expertise and the research across a wide range of areas. So I'll give you an example. Dr. Geraldine McGuinness-Clark is in secondment to the department from St Mary's University to assist us with our work about literacy development in Northern Ireland. It's a mixed approach. It's absolutely not.
To be clear, you're saying there's no validity to what I've said, that there's concern around lack of academic, local academic input into this. There's no concern from teachers that there's an overwhelming volume of stuff happening, and there's no concern around the pace of change.
Of course, a change programme, there will always be concerns, and I absolutely accept that. As part of the Transform Ed roadshows, I've been out talking to school leaders, over 750 school leaders, and yes, they did raise concerns about the amount of information that was coming to schools. We've absolutely taken that on board. One of the pieces that the department's committed to is publishing in the new year a very clear roadmap of key developments. The other piece, I wrote to schools on Monday and I was very clear, we will make sure that things are well sequenced, that they're carefully sequenced. The Minister's been really clear on that. For example, with curriculum reform, which you mentioned earlier, one of the key asks that we've had from the task force is that they look at how we phase implementation of the new curriculum and how we sequence it both across year groups and across subjects, so it's not bang, here's the new curriculum. If we're talking about something like qualifications reform, the very earliest teaching of the new qualification specifications would be from September 2028. There has been significant activity around professional learning, and that's because we've gone from a standing start. We've had very little investment historically over the last 10 years in professional learning, and we've gone from a standing start. In terms of, you mentioned Inner Drive and the direct award contract, that's one very small element. Our colleagues in EA with ETI are delivering the enhanced induction programme. 31 million has went directly to schools over the 3-year period for them to purchase professional learning. We worked, for example, with colleagues in Stranmillis University College to market their professional learning offer directly to all schools, so that there was that local piece there. Absolutely, this is a mixed piece. Of course, people have different views. Of course, some areas of education research are contested. Of course they are. But this is an evidence-based approach. It is based on learning what is good from elsewhere. It is not about cut and paste, but graft and grow. And I think that's really important to emphasise. We are not lifting things from other contexts and placing them into Northern Ireland without thought. We are looking at to graft and grow those common features that are there in high-performing education systems.
Wanted to ask about an awful lot more, particularly phonics, but we're not going to have time because other members are looking to come in. So I'll bring the Deputy Chair in and then have indications from other members.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Suzanne. Would you accept that the issue of a knowledge-rich curriculum is ideologically underpinned and that it is quite controversial?
I think in terms of the knowledge-based piece, I don't think the role of knowledge in education is controversial. I think it's a false dichotomy between knowledge and skills, and I think it's really important that we don't engage in a knowledge good, skills bad, or skills good, knowledge bad. Knowledge and skills are the same sides of the same coin. And when you think about education, I think we're all in agreement that the end goal of education is that we want our children to develop higher order skills. Things like...
Yeah, but do you accept, Suzanne, that it is ideologically underpinned and that it is controversial?
All approaches to curriculum delivery are ideologically pinned and underpinned and controversial. So, for example, a skills-based curriculum like they've introduced in Wales, there's huge criticism of that from many academics in Wales, and also from much of the teaching workforce about its lack of specificity. There's huge criticisms of the curriculum for excellence in Scotland between those who want more specificity and those who don't.
Is there widespread support among teachers and academics here for the knowledge-rich curriculum?
I would say we're at a process of, I haven't taken a straw poll of teachers or on their views of the knowledge-rich approach, but I do know what teachers told the curriculum monitoring report in 2019 when SIA carried that out. They said there was a lack of specificity. They said they didn't feel well supported to deliver the curriculum in a well-sequenced manner. They also said that there's considerable workload concerns about the current curriculum because they have to design a lot of curriculum resources themselves. There's not clear topics to teach and things like that. They have to do a lot of curriculum design. They have to do a lot of lesson design.
Let me pick up one of those points. You're saying there should be greater specificity in subjects. Who would design and develop the history curriculum here?
We have a working group that's established within the curriculum task force. That working group includes subject practitioners. It includes local academics, Professor Marie Coleman, who's a local Irish academic from Queen's University, Professor Henry Patterson, a number of subject teachers, both at primary, who are experts in world around us, post-primary history experts. So there's a working group there.
Would creationism be included in that?
In a history curriculum?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Definitely not.
Definitely
Would it be included in any other subject?
Creationism?
Yeah.
Well, no.
No, okay, that's fair enough. In the document Transform Ed, I'm quoting you from page 58, or quoting the document, the strategy aims to reframe the discussion about education in Northern Ireland and to begin an open and honest conversation about our education system. How can we have an open and honest conversation when academic selection isn't even on the agenda?
In terms of academic selection, no, you're quite right. It's not on the agenda. It's not part of the Transform Ed programme. I think in terms of
How can we have an open and honest conversation then?
in terms of it, there's mixed views on academic selection. There's not one view. The system's divided on it.
The overwhelming evidence, Suzanne, from academia and from educators and educationalists is that academic selection is damaging to children and damaging to the education system.
In terms of the academic evidence from OECD and others is that structural choices like academic selection actually have more limited impact on average achievement than the quality of teaching. So if you look at something like the OECD's Unlocking High Quality Teaching report, it's really clear that structural features like academic selection are much less important than the quality of teaching that children experience every day. And what you see in terms of academic selection is that you see a mixture of systems. So you see some systems with academic selection that are high performing and high equity. Examples of that would be Singapore, which is academic selection, the Netherlands, Switzerland and others. But you also see, yes, systems that are low performing and low equity that have academic selection and don't. So I'll use our near neighbour.
Since you mentioned Singapore, are you aware that up to $1.8 billion is spent annually by families on private tuition and exam coaching for their children?
Yeah.
Would you accept that distorts the outcomes in the education system?
So the issue in terms of private tuition is not that it's not a flawed intervention. So small group tuition with a qualified teacher, one-to-one or in a small group, is a hugely effective educational intervention. It's actually the intervention that we use for children with special educational needs. The problem is access to it through payment is a problem. Absolutely it is. In terms of academic selection, the piece I was going to make is it's not the most important driver of educational outcomes.
Yeah, just before you move on that, are you aware that the Singapore government has recently embarked on a reform programme to move away from these narrow, high-stakes exams, the rote-driven learning, and a more holistic and socially inclusive model, and is even beginning to unwind elements of its academic selection system?
The difference between Singapore and Northern Ireland, Pat, is that they have 5 tracks. Our children go through academic selection and they go to selective and a non-selective school. They get exactly the same Northern Ireland curriculum at Key Stage 3. That's not the case in Singapore. They have vocational and academic tracks. So it's a very different education system.
And are you telling me then that academic selection here is good for our education system and good for the children here?
I'm saying that academic selection isn't the key feature in shaping our education system.
Does it distort the results in Pearls and Tims?
It improves the results in Pearls
and
Tims. In Pearls and Tims, what it shows is that they're taken at the end of P6. Our children perform really strongly in reading and maths. They don't perform as strongly in science, and science isn't part of the selection process.
How come the children in the education system in the South outperform the children here, yet they don't have academic selection?
Well, how come our children outperform Wales and they don't have academic selection? It's not the key factor. Wales performs lower than us across every single domain, and it's a comprehensive system.
I want a better system to be used as a comparator, not a worse system. I mean, you've been using Singapore. Why not use the South? They're miles and miles ahead of us.
Did use the South, I said. They outperformed us in reading, maths and science. Yeah. I also don't think we can cherry pick. Some systems without academic selection outperform us. Some are worse than us, and clearly worse than us. I'm saying to you, yes, the Republic of Ireland outperform us. They don't have selection. Wales are significantly worse than us across all 3 domains, and they don't have academic selection.
You didn't answer the question. I asked you the question, are you saying that academic selection doesn't harm our education system or our children here?
I'm saying it's not the key factor in shaping
No, that's not what I'm
educational
asking
performance.
you. I'm asking you, does it harm the children and does it harm the outcomes in the system?
Doesn't harm the outcomes in the system in terms of we have excellent non-selective schools. Our Tim's and Pearl's outcomes are actually higher as a result of test coaching, so it doesn't harm outcomes.
And then you're saying the high tail of educational underachievement has nothing to do with academic selection?
I'm saying that we have schools with strong, high concentrations of disadvantage that have excellent outcomes. We have schools with high concentrations of disadvantage.
Again, you're not answering the question I'm asking, Suzanne.
Just in the interest of time, one last attempt.
Okay. What I'm asking you is, or what I'm saying is, we have the longest tail of educational underachievement on these islands. If you use the South as a comparator, yes we do. And Bob Salisbury actually argued at one time that we had the longest tail of educational underachievement in Western Europe.
That was 15 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and there hasn't been a great deal of improvement since then. And I keep saying to you, we lag miles behind the South. And I'm asking, and I am asking you, are you telling us that academic selection for children at 10 and 11 years of age, one, doesn't harm the children, and two, doesn't harm the education system?
Response, and then we will move on.
I'm here to answer questions in the Transform Ed programme. The Department of Education does not administer academic selection. There's not political consensus on the matter. There hasn't been agreement in the Northern Ireland Assembly on it, and it's a matter for...
There is academic consensus on it.
We'll move on to the next member, which is Danny.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I'm going to start with some of the criticisms of Transform Ed from academics here who say it is heavily influenced by the last Conservative government in England, and it is a copy and paste job of Michael Gove and Nick Gibb. And they point to the fact that 12 of the 24 advisory posts across the Curriculum Task Force Advisory Committee, including the Chair and the Deputy Chair, the International Ministerial Advisory Panel and the Independent Review of Assessment Panel were filled from people from England. 50%. 50% is made up, and the recommended reading material for those taking part was all leaning towards traditional knowledge-rich blogs, materials, all of that there. So it was all leaning that way. So how is it not a copy and paste job?
So in terms of the knowledge-rich piece, I think I was clear earlier that there's actually agreement across the political spectrum in England about the importance of a knowledge-rich approach to the curriculum. It's been endorsed by the Francis Review. It's been endorsed by the Labour government. Okay,
no, just to be that's fine. But I'd rather you were just honest and say that Transform Ed is a copy and paste job then, because that's what, if you look at what you have set up, if 50% of the panel's all coming from England, if the reading of it is all leaning towards traditional and knowledge rich, then it is a Conservative-led approach.
So there's a couple of things. You're talking about curriculum. Mm-hmm. I had highlighted earlier there's 6 key areas across Transform Ed. Curriculum's only one of them. There are other areas are assessment. There's no involvement from anyone from England.
Okay, so look, just take the curriculum side of it. Is it a copy and paste from Gove and Gibbs?
No, it's absolutely not. It's a bespoke curriculum for Northern Ireland. Let me give
you
a
bespoke if 50% of those a part of the panels are from England?
Not 50% of the panels. The panels are over 300 people, and the vast majority of them are practitioners.
The ones that I read, I don't want to read it out again. I didn't want to read it out again, but is that true what I said though?
You've selected certain roles, and they're people from England. They're also people from across the political spectrum. So, for example, Lucy Crean, who's the Deputy Chair, was never involved in any Gove reforms or any piece like that. Others, some were, yes, absolutely.
But so what I read out earlier on is fact, and the materials that they were for all the advisory groups was leaning towards that for the curriculum.
The reading list was an academic reading list.
But
Michael Gove
hasn't
created an academic reading list. It's an academic reading list about curriculum design.
Yes,
the direction of travel is a knowledge-rich curriculum. A knowledge-rich curriculum is not
leaning.
No,
so it is political then. So it's Conservative leaning. I'll give you another example because you mentioned New Zealand. Sorry, this because I won't have much time. So New Zealand. So they've come under criticism, and the academics there are saying New Zealand deserves a national conversation about the future of our curriculum, not a unilateral import shaped by one minister's holiday reading. The Education Minister, Miss Stamford, who serves for New Zealand's right of centre National Party, was pictured at a Core Knowledge Foundation conference in Florida in June with Professor Hurst, Gibb and our own Education Minister. So how is this not a copy and paste job of what they've done to our curriculum?
Hopefully I can answer maybe this
Yes,
time.
yeah.
So in terms of knowledge rich, it's not just an English phenomenon. I've explained that Scotland, for example, are looking at a knowledge rich approach to their curriculum. I've explained it's not just a New Zealand or right wing phenomenon. The left wing Labour government in New South Wales has introduced a knowledge rich approach to curriculum design. It is knowledge rich has been introduced in a range of countries. Yes, the reading list.
Educational leaning curriculum.
Pardon?
By educationalists who are traditionalist leaning.
So the knowledge-rich approach isn't traditionalist, just to be clear about that. If you're familiar with the work of Michael Young and Future 3, the traditional curriculum was knowledge-heavy without understanding the role of skills in terms of long-term development. The new approach to knowledge-rich leans heavily on latest developments in cognitive science, which show how our children learn.
Academics are wrong when they say transform ed echoes research ed.
Research Ed is a series of conferences for teachers in England. I don't know why you would say a strategy in Northern Ireland, a government strategy, echoes a series of conferences in England that are attended by teachers right across the country. It's actually an international conference series as well, so I'm not sure how the two are comparable.
When our principals are saying they're overwhelmed,
very short, so this would be overwhelmed,
dizzy with the super swift proposals, consultations, an array of reforms, that they describe Transform Ed as a clear shift in the method of delivery in classrooms that rejects and outright opposes creativity, collaboration and critical thinking, and the sheer concept of school reform fills them with utter dread. What do you say to them principals?
That's a brief response.
I'm not sure which principals are they or who.
This is from what's been
people that you've chatted to,
yeah.
So I've also chatted to school principals who are highly favourable. I've been out talking to school principals, 750 school principals at the Transform Ed reform. Yes,
people walked out of your Transform Ed conference, by the way, in utter disgust. Utter disgust. And the speakers that you had there, 5 or 8 of them were again all from England.
Well,
big surprise.
I think that's actually a curriculum conference that was in September. I've been out doing 5 Transform Ed roadshows, which were departmental officials for 750 school leaders across Northern Ireland. The focus on Transform Ed is on professional development. It's on a range of reforms across our education system. Knowledge Rich is not a Cove-only phenomenon. It's an international piece based on cognitive science.
It's conservative right-wing agenda.
It's absolutely not, and the Labour government in Australia has introduced
not a meeting of minds in this issue. I'm going to bring Gary in.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Suzanne, for your presentation. I have to say, I completely disagree with the sort of the way it has come across. I have been speaking to quite a number of principals, serving on Board of Governors. The feedback that I have had from those who've engaged with Transform Ed and those who went to the conferences were actually enthused by the positivity and the energy, and you know, we're actually excited that there was a focus in terms of school leaders, their development, their professional development, and building them and ensuring that they are best prepared for going into the future. Suzanne, you mentioned obviously one of the things, if we're honest, we do hear is that of course there's a lot of pressures within schools, so it's difficult to manage everything whilst also trying to, as I say, take forward this piece of work, but they want to do it. Could you maybe talk a bit more in terms of, you talked about a roadmap, and how can we better, I suppose, support those school leaders so that it doesn't feel that it's all just coming down at once?
I think the first point I want to make about that is that in the medium to long term, Transform Ed is actually about reducing teacher workload. So if you look at issues like curriculum's been a key driver of workload because of the need to design resources, the need to do a lot of curriculum planning at a micro level, at the school level, because there isn't clarity about the concepts, the knowledge, the skills that young people should develop throughout their academic journey. We want to have really good resources. We want to have really good sequencing of the curriculum, so that ultimately will reduce teacher workload. It's the same around issues such as controlled assessment, which have been a key driver of teacher workload. When you look at an area like statutory key stage assessment, we've replaced a hugely unpopular approach based on teacher judgment, where individual teachers had to level every child with low stakes tests that are low workload and are based on a sample. So the direction of travel around Transform Ed is very much in line with that overarching theme of trying to reduce teacher workload and free up teachers to have more time around teaching and learning. And absolutely, I've been out talking to school leaders and people have said to me, really enthusiastic about this, yes, the pace has been fast in terms, but it's not actually in terms of implementing change, because apart from professional learning, we're not in implementation. It's just been the amount of information. So what we've committed to do is a visual representation, a roadmap of all the key steps of the journey. We're going to write to schools at the beginning of every term, setting out all the key communications that term so that they're very clear about that. We also think that we'd be able to time things better as we're up and running with the programme. So an example I give to you of that is with the Teacher Professional Learning Fund, because we needed to get business case approval and get that up and running, we couldn't roll it out to September for schools for the year, for the 25-26 academic year. Next year we'll have that ready to go May time, and it'll be all there well in advance of the academic year. So look, we're absolutely cognizant of the pressures that school leaders and teachers are under. We want to work with them. We want to invest in the workforce. We want to be really clear about communications. We want them to be well sequenced, and we want to make sure that people are clear about how things will happen and that they feel supported in terms of these reforms.
Oh, that's useful. And another thing that you touched on in your presentation was around the issue of inspection. And how important is that? Because obviously that has been sort of a shortcoming, if you like, in terms of schools and action short of strike and the lack of inspection. How important is the issue of inspections for sort of monitoring performance and ensuring that obviously the children are getting the best possible education?
Yeah, so inspection has a wide range of benefits. It has benefits for us at a system level, that we understand and know how that information, when it's aggregated up at system level, what's happening in our system. The most important function, I would say, of inspection is that it informs and supports school improvement. So the current inspection approach is very much about empowering improvement in schools. It's also about making sure that those schools that need external support are identified through inspection, and that external support is put in place to improve outcomes for young people. So it's a critically important part of our education system, and as you said, has been significantly disrupted through action short of strike. I'm delighted that we've had a period of industrial stability, and with the exception of 2 short months this year, we've had a full programme and over 150 inspections, and we see there is quite a number of schools coming through that require that external support. We also see that examples of good practice in our own system, because Transform Ed is very much about building on and identifying good practice in our own system, which is really important, that we're able to get those inspection reports and have those thematic evaluations. So it's an integral part of improving and pushing on our system.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thanks, we're out of time there. Thank you, Gary. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, folks. I sort of raised this last week, and it was in the back of approaches from people, and I think the urgency, really people started approaching us, was around the subject working groups being set up and actually starting to see how this might roll out. I think it's worth saying that in their approaches, people were very wary of coming forward. They have all described a climate of fear really around this and around education at the minute, that if they were to speak out and speak out publicly, they would face some kind of retribution. So the conversations we've had have been online, have been a little clandestine, because people have been genuinely very concerned, and I can see heads shaking and exchanges here. That is exactly what they've told us, and I'm not making that up. I'll give you a quick rundown of some of the key concerns around all of this that have been raised probably is appropriate, raised with me. The ideology behind it, what's being imposed is how they phrased it, the speed of implementation, English consultants forming the bulk of the influence around this, granting of contracts without tenders, the core content framework for initial teacher training, the assessments will serve grammar sector better than it will serve others, money spent on the independent review of education and the selective implementation of that now through Transform Ed. And again, I think what has prompted people to come forward recently is these subject working groups. So I'll get into that a wee bit at the start. I'm going to ask you a question that's similar to others, but it's specific around how it's been framed to me. So, and again, I'm not an expert in this, so I am reflecting to you what people have asked me to reflect today and to ask the question so they can have what they feel is transparency that they think is missing from this process. So, more specific than maybe other people have framed it, is it a copy and paste of the values and ethos of the English national curriculum? So not getting a copy and paste the curriculum to that curriculum, the values and ethos underpinning specifically the English national curriculum.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
In terms of the recommendations and the approach of our curriculum task force, and I'll bring Peter in to say a little bit more about it in a second, our approach is based on Lucy Crane's strategic review of the Northern Ireland curriculum, and that review identified core weaknesses in our curriculum, and the curriculum reform approach is very much about tackling those. I'm going to give you a little example. One of the recommendations in Lucy Crane's report is that we would have capabilities that sit above each subject. Those capabilities are things like critical thinking, like financial literacy, all those capabilities that we want our young people to have. They're not present in the English curriculum. There's not a capabilities approach in the English curriculum.
That's very specific, and like I say, I want to just reflect the things that have been brought to me. So there was a values and ethos was the perspective, and to be honest, the people who've come to me, whilst I'm not an expert, they are, and they have all been consistent in raising this concern. So one of
the curriculum's not written yet. So
well, this is where we're going to go with this. There's a concern that it's not written yet, but the direction of travel has absolutely already been set. So one of the biggest, kind of guess, controversies around the national curriculum that was set up in England was around history, and I know Pat has alluded to that already. You mentioned earlier about our children being taught the right thing, which feels like quite a subjective statement. So I think there will be some concern that the final draft of this, what the actual content will be, there will be narrative set in that the person who will ultimately sign that off will be the Minister, Paul Givan.
Well, just to be clear, in terms of the history curriculum, I meant...
One example.
No, I know, I was just to give you that, but to be clear about that, we have two local academics on that. One, as I said, was Professor Mary Coleman, who's an Irish historian and Irish academic from the Republic of Ireland, with Professor Henry Patterson, who's a local academic, with subject teachers. The full draft curriculum will be subject to full public consultation and feedback.
Final decisions will be the Ministers.
Final decision will be the Assembly's. The curriculum has to be laid as regulations before the Assembly.
The subject working groups has been controversial.
A huge amount of time, so question quickly and answer quickly, Suzanne. Yeah,
I know. Come on. Well, I'll go to education underachievement then. So there's a lot around education underachievement that's around this. Again, what has been said again and again is that we are using the English approach here, and that English approach did not actually close the attainment gap. And I have people come and say to me that the approach that's being applied here actually will make things worse. So if we look at the recent Stromulus, academics have produced a report recently, I'm sure you've probably seen that looked at educational underachievement. They didn't talk about knowledge-rich curriculum, they talked about things like flexibility, they talked about pastoral care. I don't see any of that in the approach that you're bringing forward. So there's a concern that we're going to undermine progress that's being made.
I suppose just to be clear, I think we need to think about the department's approach as Transform Ed as one pillar of the department's approach. So there are other pillars of the department's approach. For example, earlier this week, we've launched consultation on a new attendance strategy. There's significant ongoing work on a range of programmes in that area. The SEN reform agenda is an executive priority and is a huge priority for the department. The early years and childcare strategy is another priority. So Transform Ed is one priority. It focuses on curriculum, assessment, qualifications, tackling disadvantage and those areas. It doesn't have a specific focus on emotional well-being. That's another area of the department, and there is a focus on that. And when we look at things like the draft attendance strategy consultation.
And close the attainment gap, schools that are succeeding do these things, and they have expressed concern that the approach that you're taking will strip that out. And we risk, especially if we're following what was happened in England, not actually making any real difference to the attainment gap, and that would be a missed opportunity.
And I suppose just to
So not to
say
close it
that
off.
overall outcomes in England have significantly improved over the last decade, and they've
Disputed, absolutely disputed.
well. Can I give you just a flavour of their PISA outcomes?
Is it from Gibbsburg or is it
That's PISA. It's their PISA scores. So if you think about England, our score was significantly lower than England. Our average score in maths was significantly now above Northern Ireland. A decade ago, it was statistically significantly below Northern Ireland. That could only happen by bringing up lower attainers as well. You can't improve
within
your average
England,
score without
there
doing
wasn't
that.
a great improvement. So looking at us in England, but looking at England and then the Gove reforms and what happened, there wasn't actually a massive improvement, and I think that's the concern. We'll leave it there.
The data is they've improved across all three domains, so I'm not sure
think
what
it's
the data
I
is.
think it's absolutely disputed.
We have to close that there, David. Bring you in.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I think if there's anything that's been ideologically unpinned and controversial, it's the approach some members have taken to this session. I think some clearly go to bed and check for the bogeyman of Michael Gove under the bed and in the closet, but we'll move on. Could I ask, in terms of, we talk about this, looking at it for depth, and teaching for depth rather than breadth. How will that change in terms of the day-to-day teaching of pupils? What will a lesson look like differently then, once these reforms have been made, than it does now? What differences will pupils notice in particular?
So I think it's really important, and it's something that has been touched on throughout this session, is distinguish between curriculum and pedagogy. Curriculum is what pupils are taught, in what sequence, and the content. Pedagogy is how they're taught it. So pedagogy, there's a range of approaches to pedagogy. Some of the approaches that we're looking at through some of our CPD programmes are things like using the latest research in cognitive science to inform teaching and learning. In terms of curriculum, the term depth rather than breadth is about the fact that we know that actually children develop those higher order skills, the critical thinking, the problem solving, the creativity that we want them to deliver when they learn more about things in depth, and they're not rushed through topic after one after another. Because at the minute, conversely, the flexibility and lack of prioritisation in our curriculum mean that everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. Teachers on the ground are left deciding at a school level what should be the priorities, and that leads to a phenomenon called curriculum overload. So it's about being really clear on the topics, how they're sequenced, and how they progressively build up over time. A key difference, and something that Year 8 teachers often say to me, and that post-primary school leaders often say to me, that outside literacy and numeracy, our current curriculum, the young people don't have a common core knowledge and skills in subjects like science, history and geography when they come into Year 8. And the aim is to be more specific, so there is that common core. So then when the children go to post-primary, the post-primary teachers can develop on that prior knowledge, understanding that the children have, so that it is sequenced and coherent. And new knowledge builds on prior knowledge. Everything we know about learning tells us that. It also tells us that those skills are not built in a vacuum. I can't think critically about nuclear physics, for example, because I don't have any prerequisite knowledge about it. Can think critically about education matters. It's it's as simple as that. We need knowledge to think critically.
I'm trying to simplify it for myself. It's not actually we may be losing topics, but the same skills are still being developed. It's just being done more intensively on a smaller range of topics. Is that?
Yeah, it's so rather than having lots and lots of within each subject, lots and lots of things packed in across the curriculum, we're very clear and we spend more time in depth. And the other key piece of it is that you don't move on before children have the basics. So if you think, for example, of higher order skills in mathematics around algebra and geometry, if children don't have the basics around multiplication, addition, subtraction, they don't have enough working memory space left to do those higher order problems. So it is about making sure that learning is really, really well structured. It is absolutely not about rote learning. It's not about memorisation. It's not about drilling. We're all in agreement that the end game of education is for our children to develop those high order skills. What we're talking about is how they develop them best. And the educational research, which I'm familiar with is very clear that they do need a strong grounding in subject knowledge to do that. They can't think critically about physics or biology or chemistry unless they have some of those building blocks of knowledge and information to develop, and then they can, critical thinking, creativity, all of that emerge from a well-structured curriculum.
Thank you. Just one more
quick question,
yes.
quick answer.
Of all the things going on in education committee, education at the moment, I have to say this is the thing that I've had most enthusiastic and positive feedback from teachers and school leaders about. But can I ask, in terms of the emphasis on teacher professional learning, how do we make sure the teachers have time for that, and will the reduced workload that you've talked about feed into that?
Just ask it to answer as briefly as you can.
So it's really important. We in Northern Ireland give 5 Baker Days and 5 School Development Days. That's actually double the amount that they have in other jurisdictions across the Isles. So there is significant time across the year. That's not to say there's not significant pressures around trying to fit in professional learning, and we do need to think about that. One of the key pieces is we will need to look at what days, what time is necessary as we introduce curriculum reform. I think it's really, really important. The School Development Days were introduced previously at the beginning of the introduction of the current curriculum, and we'll need to think about what time and space we can free up for our teachers and school leaders to support them through the professional learning as we introduce a new curriculum reform cycle.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Cathy, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. Suzanne, you've mentioned you've put a lot of emphasis on the roadshows and the engagement that's been done around this, and the department have spent hundreds of thousands on these conferences. I think the figure was around 100,000 on 2 conferences, and there's been a lot of glossy engagement and events on it. But the reality is, whether you like it or not, that there are principals out there, not just principals, teachers, young people themselves are very, very sceptical about this and really concerned about it. And they don't feel it is connected to any reality of what's actually happening in schools at the minute. We have a broken SEND system. That's the reality. We have children who can't actually sit in classrooms at the minute. We have schools closed because the children can't sit in it. And I know that you're saying it's 2 different pots of funding. The children sitting in that classroom, or should be sitting in that classroom, don't care what pot of funding that comes from. What are you going to do immediately that's going to reassure those principals that are coming to us with concerns? Because anything they've heard here today, I don't think they are going to be reassured with it.
I think in terms of this programme, the point I want to emphasise to you is that there's significant issues in our education system. There absolutely is, across the piece. I think they're well acknowledged. They're well acknowledged by the department. They're well acknowledged by this members of the committee. Of course, SEND reform has to be a key priority for the department. And when we are looking at issues like curriculum, we are looking at issues like SEND. So can I give you one example about curriculum? The current curriculum, there is no bespoke curriculum for special schools. You know what that means for our special schools? They have to buy in commercial curriculum. Do you know where they buy the commercial curriculum in from? England. That's where they buy commercial curriculum, because the Northern Ireland curriculum as we currently have it isn't fit for purpose. The new curriculum is going to have a bespoke elements of the curriculum for special schools and for learners in special schools. You see, in our current curriculum, there's no bespoke language and literacy framework for Irish medium practitioners and schools. I've talked to them across the board. It's a huge frustration for them. They have to start from scratch because the curriculum isn't suitable. Irish medium education requires a huge level of emphasis on oracy, which they need. There's going to be language and literacy element for Irish medium in this. So what I want to give you the reassurance is we are taking an account of particular groups of learners when we're looking at these aspects. So, for example, in assessment, in statutory assessment, we are making sure that the arrangements for statutory assessment take into account the needs of all learners. The SEA Computer Adaptive Assessment is designed as an adaptive assessment that can be used for those with moderate learning difficulties. When we look, so all those pieces, we are trying to build in the needs of SEN learners, but SEN learners need a really good curriculum. They need really good pedagogy. They need really good assessment. They need that reform. A curriculum that came nearly 20 years ago with nothing bespoke isn't fit for purpose.
I fully accept that. But the reality is that we have children who still aren't in school. We have children with special educational needs who can't physically get into a classroom because the classrooms aren't ready for them. Why is the focus and the concern not based on that right now? You mentioned there about buying the curriculum from England around SEN. Who is the chair of the curriculum task force?
Can I answer the first question just about the SEN piece, about classrooms and the focus not being on? Just to say, the Minister has put a piece of the SEN Capital Investment Programme, the education, to the executive 3 months ago. The Education Authority has developed detailed plans for investment in SEN that's required over the next decade. We have a plan. We don't have the funding to deliver it, so it is our focus, and we've spent a lot of time developing that plan.
Okay, but the reality is we're still sitting in a scenario now where there's children not in school. But can I ask, who is the chair of the curriculum task force?
Christine Council.
And can you give us an idea what Christine's background is?
So Christine's background is that for many years she led the PGCE in history at Cambridge University. She's been an education subject advisor in a number of local councils and pieces like that.
Okay. Does she own a company that has written the resources for the knowledge-rich curriculum in England?
No. She has a private company that develops resources. It's not rolled out England-wide. Her company is not being used to develop any resources for Northern Ireland. I want to be really clear on that.
She's the chair of the curriculum task force.
People have a variety of...
Okay.
Can I answer the question? Because I think it is important. It's about someone's integrity.
I'm sure I think it's
just to say, people have
answer
private business interests. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the curriculum in Northern Ireland.
It does have to do with the curriculum.
It doesn't.
If she is the chair, if this is the chair of the task group that is designing the curriculum here.
So we're talking about two different things. We're talking about curriculum design and we're talking about resources that are used. So, for example, SIA would develop curriculum resources for Northern Ireland, not a private company.
I'm not saying that she's going to develop the resources for here, but I'm saying she's still the chair of the curriculum task force.
I know the comment, Cathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Cara, you'd indicated
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for being here. I just want to focus primarily on point 8 of the 10-point plan, looking at educational disadvantage and supporting our young people. How do you define educational disadvantage?
So in terms of that, there's a range of factors in terms of definition of educational disadvantage. Long-standing measure, and just to be clear, my colleague Claire McClellan leads on the tackling educational disadvantage programmes within the department, not myself, so Claire will be able to answer you more fully than I would. There's a range of measures in terms of disadvantage. Obviously, free school meals has been used as a proxy. There's area deprivation measures. There's also the piece about educational outcomes, which need to be really taken into account, whether it's low performance at GCSE, at A level, and pieces like that.
So outside of socio-economic background and free school meals, for example, family income, how else can educational disadvantage be defined?
Well, there's pieces like the maternal level of education, which a lot of studies would say is a stronger predictor of educational outcomes than socio-economic disadvantage. Mm-hmm. Another thing that's a stronger outcome is reading for pleasure, for example, has a stronger correlation to educational and academic success than socio-economic disadvantage. So there's a range of pieces there.
Okay, so with regards to point 8 and children who I would define as having an educational disadvantage, children who are carers, for example, children who are looked after children of alcoholics, children in homes with domestic violence, I think it's a really important one given the prevalence of gender-based violence that we have in the north. Mm-hmm. And of course, children who suffer from abuse, neglect or trauma. I would define that as an educational disadvantage. So I'm just curious,
yes,
has that fed into point 8 of the 10-point plan?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of point 8, I suppose just 2 points. One is that the RAISE programme is designed right across the piece to look at a wide range of interventions in terms of educational disadvantage, and particularly to look at educational disadvantage in terms of those issues. So absolutely it does, and RAISE is designed to have that integrated approach with the development of the locality plans around that.
Can I ask, you had mentioned there, is it the maternal educational attainment, is that what you had referred to? Because I just, in conversations that I've had with young people, oftentimes what I'll see is a child who, on paper, I suppose, looks middle class, and maybe both of their parents are university educated, but their household is totally dysfunctional. Yes. There might be elements of domestic violence, the child has significant responsibility, maybe there's addiction in the home. How will point 8 of this 10-point plan help support those children who, on paper may not be seen to have an educational disadvantage or challenge, but in real life they do. How will this reach them and support them?
So I think in terms of that, say the RAISE programme does like, and the point you're making is really, it's well made and it's well established. Like, there's a wider issues across society now in terms of family and social structures that are impacting all classes of society. I think it would probably be best if we came back to you in writing in terms of that, in terms of my colleague coming back to that, in terms of the different range. There's a broad range of departmental programmes, some that are focused in terms of young carers, some are focused in terms of other groups that are disadvantaged, subject to educational disadvantage, traveller, Roma community, and others who've historically had low educational outcomes. So I'd like to arrange to get you a bit of a written briefing of that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that would be fantastic, because when we were reading through our pack, I saw for children from relatively advantaged backgrounds, so I'd just love to know how that's defined, because I read that the curriculum they follow at school has always been less material. Their parents will ensure that they have background knowledge, but that's not always promised, even if they do come from a relatively advantaged background. Just one more question. I recently met with a really incredible young woman, and she was telling me she's really struggling because her family are just above the threshold for EMA, with regards to her family make just slightly more than 22.5 grand per year. And she has to work in a part-time job, which is impacting her ability and her capacity to study, to engage in extracurricular activities, and to really just enjoy the school experience. Can I ask, for those children who do experience poverty, but they're just above certain thresholds, how will Transform Ed and point 8 of the 10-point plan impact and support those children who are under more pressure, more stress, and feel that financial burden in the home?
Yeah, so I think in terms about children who are above threshold, it's a really important point that poverty doesn't begin and end on the threshold of free school meals, and I think the point's really well made. In terms of any child in that situation, there needs to be a range of interventions. So in Transform Ed, the primary focus is around curriculum, assessment, qualifications. The tackling disadvantage piece in Transform Ed is primarily about the RAISE programme and raising the school leaving age, but we need a holistic approach. We have programmes like the Extended Schools programme that provide wraparound care. We've programmes that we've significant additional funding, £75 million a year, that goes through the common funding formula to tackle educational disadvantage. That gives money directly to schools. So there has to be a holistic approach to the young person in terms of their educational journey, to make sure that a young person like that has a support, perhaps breakfast club, after school study club, around those pieces. But it has to be a holistic approach.
Yeah, just a final point. Thank you so much. I really look forward to what I get in writing. And just to summarise, she had said that she felt, because she's just above that threshold, she had her classmates who are enduring significant poverty are supported, or wealthy classmates are supported, but there's a silent suffering of those children that come from homes that are either single parent families or just above the threshold for things like free school meals and EMA. So yes, hopefully this will go some step in addressing those inequalities.
I think the point's very well made in terms of the position of those children.
Thank you.
John, you're last.
I'll be very brief because I know we're behind time. Thank you for that. I just hope we don't lose any creativity. I'm not necessarily opposed to knowledge-based curriculum. I just think creativity is so important. And I do echo what I said to the last witnesses. I do worry. I go around schools. It seems to be what gets measured gets done. An awful lot. I was in a primary school. They'd been marked down by the inspectorate because they didn't have on the walls vision, mission and value statement. And I sometimes think, right, you get primary school children with a big smile on their face. So what the head mistress or master said, the principal, they went on Google and they got one and they stuck it up on the walls, and then the UTI says that's great. Nobody made a blind bit of difference to any child in that school. And that's my concern with just a general overarching principle that what gets measured gets done. It's top-down directive, and it's just bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. Just that example annoyed me because I heard it from two different schools. I felt like ripping the thing down, to be honest, but it was beyond my remit. Anyway, getting back to knowledge-rich curriculum, one specific question. I'd got it written out earlier. The department to confirm how the outcomes and progression expectations of a knowledge-rich curriculum have been evaluated for appropriateness, particularly in relation to SEN children in mainstream schools. Okay, specifically not special schools, in mainstream schools. and pupils who economically disadvantaged communities. And what evidence underpins the view that this curriculum model meets the needs of that particular group?
So, I suppose just to say the outcomes and the content of our new curriculum haven't been developed yet. So I just want to be really clear on that. We're right at the start of the drafting process, and that's something we want to do in conjunction with over 300 practitioners from across Northern Ireland, is develop the subject content appropriately. The needs of SEND learners have to be, of course, at the heart of that. So that's just about our own curriculum. If we want to focus in terms of knowledge-rich and disadvantaged learners, the key piece, and Cara mentioned it, and it possibly wasn't as eloquently put as it should have been in the briefing, the key piece is that children from disadvantaged backgrounds don't, in general, there are exceptions to that, they don't get the same cultural capital from their home life as many children, not all, again, as Cara pointed out, as many children from more affluent backgrounds do. So they don't build up that powerful knowledge, that key knowledge that enables you to be a really strong civic participant. And therefore the role of the school in building up that powerful knowledge across a range of subjects, across science, across geography, across history, across technology, across ICT, is so important. And that's what powerful knowledge is all about. So it's specifically designed to try to level the playing field for children from disadvantaged backgrounds by making sure that they have access and that they sequence their knowledge in a cumulative fashion around those core areas, and that they build that up over time, giving them the knowledge, understanding and skills to then compete and develop those higher order skills like creativity that you were talking about. If you can't think critically in a subject area like history unless you have some factual concepts and background. It's the same in geography, but if you're in an affluent family and you can go to a museum, and you're going to a museum, or you're travelling abroad, or you're going to see a volcano and practice, you are developing a lot of that through experiential learning. If you are from a disadvantaged background, you have less opportunity to do that, and it's really important that that core knowledge is developed within the school.
And it's specifically on children with special education needs who are in mainstream schools. That's just one particular group that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we take the needs of those children into account, but we have to remember there is a difference between curriculum and pedagogy, and that's what I was talking about earlier. So when you think about curriculum, it's just a set of statements about what you should learn. That's all. In the current Northern Ireland curriculum, to give you some examples, World Around Us, which is history, geography and science in primary is under the group in World Around Us, it's 5 bullet points. That's what it is. The pedagogy is what they do in the classroom. So you're thinking about things like adaptive teaching, and that's where there's a task to be committed, but children with SEN are given significant additional support to engage with that task by the class teacher. It's all about the pedagogy in the classroom. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. Adaptive teaching is about providing structured support. One of the key aspects, and it's a core area, for example, in the literacy framework, is around structured interventions for children with SEN. It's really important that we intervene early to provide support to help children improve rather than lowering the bar for those children. We need to provide that support early and support them to develop throughout their school career. And so I think in terms of that, the curriculum will take account of those learners, but the pedagogy that we use in the classroom is a much more important piece around how that's delivered in schools on a daily basis.
It's okay. I add to that.
Just be a very brief final comment. We're really, really
I suppose
this.
I think it is very, very important. Actually, just from all of the discussion today, you know, there still is autonomy for teachers within the classroom. We're not taking autonomy away. And it is key that we need to build on the good practice. I mean, the word fear would be a worry to me, that, you know, practitioners feel fear because we have been trying to listen to teachers. But what many will say to me also is that, you know, they're not sure what early intervention looks like. They're not sure what early identification looks like. And by investing in teacher professional learning, what we're doing is two things. One, we're identifying how they can support children within the classroom. And two, we're actually sharing practice around the region. And that's key. It's not that our whole system is completely broken. we're going to build on the best bits of our system, and our teachers still have that autonomy within their classroom. I mean, we're not taking that away.
Cynthia, we are out of time there. Okay, I think members probably we could all do, and witnesses included, with a short comfort break, either to catch a breath or stretch the legs. So I think the clerk is also very, very keen now that we have everyone in the room to get a photo. So not with the departmental officials, you'll be pleased. As much as we love having you here. So if we could maybe just turn off the live feed, and we'll cover that and then come back as quickly as we can.
5 minutes for the
Yes,
5
5
Chair.
minutes.
Yes.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee.
Okay, members, that is the live feedback on, and that takes us on to item 9 on the agenda. I think it's probably appropriate to give everybody a breather there after the last session. So this is another briefing from the officials, and it's in relation to qualifications reform. So we have a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 179. We have a record of an informal meeting where the officials had briefed us on this issue at page 181. We have the minister's statement on qualifications reform at page 186, and then a further briefing paper from the department at page 35 of tabled papers. So I would just again, we've just been through a briefing session, don't need to prep you on what to do. We'll hand over for a presentation. If I could ask if we could keep the presentation time to as short as possible so we can get to questions, but I'll hand over to you at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. And thank you for a further opportunity to brief you today, this time around the future of our GCSE and A-level qualifications framework. And this is clearly a hugely important issue for education in Northern Ireland. The last comprehensive review of GCSE and A-level specifications was in 2015, and change is urgently required. Today, I will outline the current structure of CA exams, present the department's proposals for reform, share the evidence behind them, and address some of the most persistent myths surrounding our qualifications. At the outset, I'd just note for the committee that the department's consultation on reform is specifically about CA, GCSEs and A-levels. It's not about vocational qualifications. Now, to be clear, vocational qualifications are the policy responsibility of the Department for the Economy, and they're not awarded by CA, but a wide range of English awarding organisations which our schools utilise. So to start with the current structure of CA, GCSEs and A-levels. CA currently offer 41 GCSEs. Most follow a modular structure, and that means exams can be taken at the end of Year 11 as well as Year 12. English and Maths and also some of the sciences offer further opportunities in November and in Science in February. CA GCSEs currently may include non-exam assessments such as coursework, controlled assessments or practicals, and grades are awarded on an A star to G grading scale. CA also provides 31 A-levels, which are split into AS, which is 40% of the A-level, and the A2, which is 60% of the overall A-level. And AS and A2 are normally taken in years 13 and 14 respectively. Again, assessment varies by subject, including exams, coursework and practical assessment. Grades are awarded at A-level on an A to E scale, with A star available at A-level. The department is proposing to retain the GCSE and A-level brand, to reduce the content and specifications to support deeper learning, to limit GCSE and A-level assessment wherever possible to a maximum of 2 assessments per subject, to reduce or remove controlled assessments wherever possible, to move most GCSEs to a linear structure while retaining modularity for GCSE English and Maths, and to remove the AS levels and move to a 2-year linear A-level structure. And just to be clear, we've consulted on those proposals and we're now analysing the responses. Turning to the overarching rationale for reform. The first key issue is content and assessment overload. Current GCSE and A-level specifications are overloaded with excessive content and heavy assessment demands. And this creates multiple pressure points which both students and teachers have told us about. Pupils face constant deadlines and constant exams, while teachers do struggle with unsustainable workloads. There is significant lost teaching time, particularly during the long exam periods in Year 13. Education research has highlighted the problem of teaching to the test, where significant numbers of exams encourage drilling to narrow tasks rather than fostering deep understanding. The department's proposals aim to tackle these issues head-on by reducing content to allow greater depth of learning and by restricting the number of assessments in GCSE and A-level. We plan to introduce a maximum of 2 assessments wherever possible, and the reduction in content and the reduction in assessment has been strongly supported by stakeholders in the public consultation. Currently, some CA A-levels involve 6 exams across AS and A2. This is excessive. Across 3 A-levels, it means that the difference between a child in Northern Ireland taking 18 exams and a child in England, for example, taking 6. Evidence shows depth, not breadth, improves retention and application of both knowledge and skills. Employers and universities consistently value critical thinking, problem solving, skills that flourish when students have time to explore content and subject in depth rather than rushing through excessive content. The proposals will cut unnecessary overload and restore time for teaching and learning. And to be clear, lest there's any doubt, our proposal is not about shifting all the current assessments in GCSEs and A-levels to the end of the course. They're about reducing the number of exams, reducing the number of internal assessments, so students can focus on core content without constant disruption. Secondly, we're also proposing moving to a linear model for most qualifications. This should give teachers more time to teach and students more time to learn. It reduces the fragmentation of modular exams, cuts time lost to repeated testing, and supports deeper conceptual understanding. And to be clear, linear assessment is the norm across high-performing education systems. Norway, Germany, Italy, and the Republic of Ireland have linear assessment systems because it fosters sustained learning rather than short-term memorisation. Aside from Wales, no other European country puts pupils through high-stakes exams across 4 separate years. High-stakes exams currently for pupils at 15, 16, 17 and 18. Thirdly, we propose reducing non-exam assessments wherever possible. Controlled assessments add pressure for students, create heavy workload for teachers. Internal assessments will of course remain in practical subjects, technology, PE, home economics, music and drama, and a range of others. They're essential practical assessments for assessing these key skills. More widely, the Department of Education supports exams as the primary method of assessment for GCSE and A-levels for a number of reasons. Firstly, GCSE and A-level are a shared brand, and to remove exams would pose serious issues about the portability of our qualifications and the continuity of the brand. More importantly, they provide fairness and consistency that coursework cannot guarantee. To quote from the recent Francis Review, the system must maintain the important role of exams, which are the fairest way of assessing students nationally and mitigate the risk to assessment posed by generative AI. Coursework is vulnerable to plagiarism, inappropriate collaboration, and even paid work from third parties. These risks have significantly grown with generative AI tools like ChatGPT, which allow students to produce polished, original-looking work that is almost impossible to detect. AI detection tools are notoriously unreliable. Exams, by contrast, take place under strict supervision, ensuring authenticity and that grades reflect a student's own ability. Equity is another major concern. Coursework does amplify inequality because students with strong parental support have an advantage in completing coursework assignments. Teacher marking can also vary significantly between schools, and research shows this introduces inconsistency and an element of unconscious bias due to relationships and perceptions about students' abilities. Exams remove these external influences by assessing all pupils under the same conditions with standardised marking. Finally, coursework requires heavy teacher workload and continuous deadline that can create prolonged stress for pupils. Exams remain the most reliable and equitable method of assessment. The Department's proposals are rooted in strong evidence and aim to deliver real benefits. For pupils, more time to learn, fewer exams, a streamlined curriculum, a focus on depth rather than overload. For teachers, less bureaucracy and more time to teach well. Turning to next steps, the Department's consultation closed on the 13th of November with over 8,000 responses. 3,500 for the main consultation and nearly 4,500 from young people. Responses are being analysed and we've organised further engagement sessions with school leaders and young people for January. These findings, combined with empirical evidence, will shape the final proposals. We aim to confirm the new policy framework for SEA qualifications by early February 2026. This will enable the regulatory framework and guide the revision of specifications over the next number of years. As the committee is aware, the specification is the official document for each qualification, setting out what students should learn and how they will be assessed. And that review of specifications by SEA over the next number of years will involve extensive engagement with teachers and schools at subject level. First teaching will be at the earliest from September 2028. Before I conclude, there are 3 pervasive myths around qualifications I would like to address. The first myth is that linear exams are harder, that they lead to lower results, and that they disadvantage weaker or disadvantaged learners or learners with special educational needs. In reality, large-scale studies by Ofqual and Oxford University found no significant difference in GCSE outcomes between modular and linear structures. Students achieved similar grades regardless of the format, and research confirmed by our own SEA regulation is that neither system advantages or disadvantages any group by either gender, sen or socio-economic status. Common beliefs about modular being easier are not supported by the data, and they also fundamentally misunderstand how GCSEs and A-levels are awarded. SEA sets the awarding standard to ensure stability. The comparable outcomes principle is used by all major awarding bodies across the UK, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, including SEA, and it ensures fairness when specifications or assessment methods change. The goal of comparable outcomes is to keep grade standards consistent over time so that a GCSE or A-level grade means the same regardless of how or when the exam was taken. The second myth is that most students do better in resits and they need that opportunity during their course, particularly at A-level. The reality is that the vast majority of students do not improve their A-level grade by resitting AS modules. In fact, resits increase pressure and disrupt learning. The figures are very clear. So, just for the committee, only 22% of SEA AS resitters improved their AS grade, and just 7% of A-levels were higher due to resits than if the first sittings were used. So, in practical terms, for most of our children, more than 9 out of our 10 children, AS resits don't work. They don't improve their grade. They add stress and they steal time from teaching. The class is not being taught the subject when they repeat the AS, and they have to try and revise for that alongside their A2 modules. Myth 3 is that linear exams mean more pressure for pupils. The reality is that unfortunately we cannot eliminate all pressure from qualifications. Both linear and modular systems create a pressure, but different kinds of pressure. Modular spreads the workload, but it does mean more constant testing, high stakes exams across 4 years, and a resit culture that means many more exams are taken. Linear reduces interruptions in teachings, allows more time for teaching, but it does concentrate assessment at the end, creating a more high stakes exam series. Both systems have pressures, but modular does bring a relentless fragmented stress. Chair and members of the committee, as I conclude, I would reflect on the following questions. Are we content for our children to face high stakes exams in 4 consecutive years, years 11, 12, 13 and 14? Is sitting 6, sometimes with resits, 9 exams in one A-level better than 2 well-designed assessments? Does losing weeks of learning in year 13 for AS exams help our students thrive? And is it fair that some year 11 pupils, still only aged 14, compete against students who are nearly 17 at the age of year 12? Is memorising essays for controlled assessments in English language the hallmark of high quality learning? Is coursework fair and practical in an era of AI? And is it a good use of vital public funds to pay for 4 GCSE exam series annually, AS papers and marking and resits that rarely improve grades? Chair, members, the department's proposals aim to create a system that is fair and fit for purpose. The evidence is clear. The current structures create unnecessary pressure, they fragment learning and place a heavy administrative burden on teachers. We need a system that prioritises depth of understanding, significantly reduces content in GCSEs and A-levels, reduces the number of exams and assessments. And I look forward to working with you over coming months, along with practitioners across Northern Ireland, to shape the next chapter for qualifications in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, just members, if you want to begin indicating just through the clerk in terms of coming in for questions. Look, there's no doubt that it's a complex picture, and there are pluses and minuses to whatever you approach you take, and there's probably no system of awarding qualifications that is ever going to be perfect. I suppose my concern is that through engagement with young people, I haven't yet met a young person who's saying, I think this is the right direction of travel. Now, there may be nuances and differences in that. I'm not, and again, I'm very, very clear that it's anecdotal, and we'll see what the responses to the consultation is. But the timescales you're setting out are really quite rapid. The consultation's not long closed, and we're looking at early February for the outworkings of that to be made clear and the direction of travel then set. So in that really tight timescale, I suppose my concern is if the feedback that comes through from the consultation and the engagement in January from young people is clear that yes, there is pressure in both systems, but we actually think that whether there are elements of the current system we do not want to use and that will lose and that will work for us. Will the department listen to that, and will the department act on that, or is the decision made?
So just to be really, really clear, the final decisions aren't made. Just to be clear, across the range of proposals, there's differences in views. So, for example, some elements of the proposals, and we will be publishing a full consultation report, but some elements of the proposals, for example, about a reduction in the number of exams, about reduction in content, are strongly supported by all respondents and by young people in particular. Majority of respondents do support removal, for example, of controlled assessment. You're quite right, there is more mixed views on modular and linear, and there is opposition, particularly from young people, to removing the AS and to the changes in the grading scale. So it's a mixed picture. Absolutely, we need to engage with young people, we need to engage with teachers. I think it's important to remember that actually this consultation has been closed now for some weeks, so we've been reflecting on the outcomes for a number of weeks. We haven't just closed it. We've arranged significant engagement sessions with all school leaders for early January, setting up further engagement with young people. We'll publish the outcomes of the consultation, and absolutely, I think there are some areas where absolutely views have been given loud and clear, but I think the core of the department's proposals to reduce content and to reduce the number of exams are really, really important and will reduce stress for young people, will support a better learning experience for them at both Key Stage 4 and Post 16.
So some of that is welcome from my perspective, that there is maybe a degree of consensus coming through in some aspects of this. You've highlighted, and I'll finish with this because I know other members will want to come in and we are pressed for time. You've said that there's really no difference in outcome based on modular versus linear, and that there's pressure and stress at different points in that process depending on when you put it. I suppose the question, just to be really direct, is if it clearly comes through from young people, particularly on the issue of ASs, that they would prefer to have that buffer of ASs in the middle of the process rather than making the exams more high stakes at the end. If they're very clear, if they're going to choose between one kind of pressure and the other, that's the one that they would choose, and they're very clear on that. Is there any prospect that we're going to end up with something different than what you've proposed in your opening presentation?
Well, I suppose the issue about the AS is about more than just pressure. So you're absolutely right. The two sets of assessment create different types of pressure, and we can talk through that. And as you say, young people may be clear that they feel that having the AS reduces pressure, but there are other issues about the AS. The biggest issue about the AS is the loss of teaching time. And almost 2 months of teaching time is lost in year 13, and that's really unique. We are really unique in having...
Could I maybe just speak to that, because I know in our informal briefing this was something that came up, so it's just, are there not maybe other solutions that could be dealt with at school level of, altering the scheduling of the examinations, bringing the young people back and getting on with teaching rather than necessarily throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Again, if that is the clear intent of young people, who are the people we're putting through these tests, are saying, we want to retain this, if they're fundamentally clear on that. And I suspect, and I could be wrong, but I suspect that's what will come through in the consultation.
Just to be clear as well, the department's guidance, and it's been our clear guidance for a significant number of years, is that we recommend that every school brings back the learners after the AS assessments. But just in terms of the exam timetable, CA do everything they can to make sure we have the narrowest time scale possible. The issue is you can't schedule A2 and AS exams at the same time for the obvious reason that there are resitters. So that you can't elongate those into a single. So while you have GCSEs and A-levels obviously going on at the same time, you can't do that with AS and A2, and CA do try every single year to keep that as short as possible, but it isn't if we think we can make significant differences in terms of the timetable, that's not practical.
That's fine, and I'm sorry for cutting you off. It's just we are conscious of time. I think for me, really, from the experience of the school uniform bill in particular, I think there's a risk of just eroding young people's confidence in policy making if they feel they engage and then are not listened to. So I think it's really important on this. This so fundamentally impacts young people's experience of education. I think we need to be really clear on the other side of this, that young people have had their voices heard. But I'll leave that as a comment.
I absolutely agree about the importance of engagement and reflecting on young people's views and opinions. I absolutely agree, Chair.
Bring the Deputy Chair in.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I just want to revisit the issue of academic selection for a minute. Would you agree that academic selection in primary schools distorts the curriculum in primary schools?
I would agree with that. The academic selection creates a greater emphasis on English and Maths and the upper level of Key Stage 2, so it changes the curriculum in terms of there's not always sufficient time in the curriculum for other curricular areas. I think that's a factual piece that's well established by OECD and others when they reviewed our system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you also agree with me that the best predictor of educational outcomes is the socio-economic background of a child or of children?
I would say it's a key factor in predicting educational outcomes. It's not the only factor, of course, but it is a key factor, yes.
It's the primary factor in predicting educational outcomes.
Factor with the largest correlation, yes.
Yeah. And you disagreed with me when I was talking about educational underachievement earlier. So can I just quote you from the Transform Ed document? It says, educational underachievement linked to economic disadvantage is an issue that has persisted for many years, despite numerous policy interventions and significant financial investment. So I'm arguing that academic selection is an important factor in all of that, that academic selection divides the haves from the have-nots, and therefore they're at a disadvantage immediately. Are you familiar with the Coleman report, Suzanne?
Pardon?
Are you familiar with the Coleman report,
I'm not
1966 report from the US? Research was carried out between schools that mixed children from different socioeconomic backgrounds and other schools in disadvantaged areas that were given extra funding to try and improve outcomes. And the best outcomes were in the schools where there was a mix of socioeconomic background. And academic selection is ensuring that that doesn't happen here. Because while socioeconomic background is the primary factor in underachievement, the second best indicator is who's sitting beside a child in school. Because if they're also from a disadvantaged background, then that reinforces the possibility of underachievement. So I'm leaving that there for now.
Can I answer or give a reflection?
Well, it's more a comment than a question. Okay. But if you want to comment,
well, it's just going to comment.
You're just taking up my time.
No, it's fine. I was just going to comment in terms of it. I have made the reflection. You've quoted one research piece. I can quote a range of research that shows that there are selective systems that are high attainment and high equity across the piece.
Not the one we have, Suzanne. And there's any amount of research to show that it's affecting our education system.
The other piece I would also emphasise is that we see, when we draw the regression correlation in terms of socioeconomic disadvantage and outcomes, we actually see that some of our schools with the highest levels of socioeconomic disadvantage are outperforming schools with lower levels of socioeconomic disadvantage. And there is a lot of research around this area, and I'm familiar with the general concept that mixed socioeconomic cohorts in schools creates, potentially greater equity, and I'm familiar with that. What I would say to you is that greater equity isn't guaranteed in socioeconomic composition by getting rid of academic selection, because in many systems internationally, instead of that, you get selection by postcode, where the most affluent families colonise the housing and other things near the most successful schools. It's a prevalent phenomenon in England and other systems.
It wouldn't happen here because it's too small an area. But we'll let that sit there for now. A lot of young people cross the border to go to university in the south, and many come from the south to the north as well. Can you tell me to what extent you've engaged with your counterparts in the south in regard to the changes that are proposed to be made in terms of qualifications, and what discussions have been had around equivalence of qualifications north and south?
So there is a key issue there, and I'm glad you've picked up on it, because actually the minister met the Minister for the Economy a couple of weeks ago, and they had picked up on it as well. The key issue here is about recognition of the A-level qualification in the Republic of Ireland. For many years in the Republic of Ireland, to get the maximum points equivalent to the Leaving Cert, you needed 4 A stars at A-level and you needed to take maths. There was a committee that worked on that and it changed in 2023, but there are still significant issues because now to get the maximum points, you need 3.5, you need 3 A-levels, an AS, and to get the extra 25 bonus points, you need to take A-level maths, okay? The issue there is that, I think the issue you're getting at is about the AS and the extra points from that. The issue there is that most children in non-selective schools, almost all children do not take 4 ASs, so they can't get the maximum points. So the conversations that both the ministers have agreed that we need to have in terms of that is about getting recognition for maximum points for 3 A-levels without A-level maths for children going to the Republic of Ireland universities, and both ministers agreed, I think, to work together on
what
that.
stage are those discussions at?
Both ministers agreed that they would start initiating those and work together, but that's not an issue, Pat, about our reform programme. That's an issue about recognition of the A-level brand more generally. It's a current issue, it's not a reform issue.
And I understand that, but just given the fact that there's a proposal now to change our qualifications and the way those qualifications are achieved, I mean, it would be helpful if there's coordination right across the area.
Yeah.
Thanks.
To close that one there. Donna, you were next. Oh, sorry, Cara had one.
Come in briefly. As Suzanne, you had raised concerns of AI ethics in academia, so it's relevant here that I declare an interest as I do an hour of work on AI ethics outside of my MLA role. So, thanks. Just put that on record.
I'll bring Danny and just realised we do have a change of panel, so I should just introduce. We have Karen McCullough, Curriculum Qualifications and Standards Director, and Jonathan Cockerill, Head of Qualifications Reform Team, which I should have done at the start. Danny.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So reducing one-off high-stake exams, just following on from what Pat said, but we're not removing the transfer test. Would you agree with me that the transfer test is the highest one-off stake exam that a child will ever do?
I do accept it's a high stakes exam, absolutely, yeah.
And probably the hardest that you ever do at age 11 with no chance of repeating it.
Well, I'm here to talk about qualifications reform.
But your Department of Education, this is the curriculum, you're here about changes, and you were in your evidence saying that you want to reduce the high stakes exam, but yet you won't even acknowledge or won't try to change the one that warps our whole
academic
education
selection. There isn't a state test in Northern Ireland. It's run independently by the schools that operate it. There has not been consensus either with the public. There was many reports, the Burns report, the Costello report. There is not consensus. Thousands of parents enter their children in transfer tests every year. The uptake hasn't declined. There's strong support in our society for academic selection. There's also strong views against. There could be a lot of time and effort spent in trying to reach consensus about it, but consensus isn't there because opinion is vastly divided.
It does, but it does warp our curriculum, though.
It has an impact in terms of an increased focus on English and maths in Key Stage 2.
So we talk about high stakes exams, removing coursework and an AS level then creates a one-off high stakes exam at the end of your school.
There's no suggestion that there would be one exam.
There'll be probably two exams, but it's all based in the last year, so it'll be high stakes exams probably. I remember I done the old A levels, and that's the way it was. It was based on you'd done 2 exams for your subject at the end of upper 6th. You didn't do anything in lower.
So if we're talking about
if you remove
A levels, if you remove AS, so I suppose just a couple of points. What we're actually talking about is significantly reducing the content. We're talking about significantly. I'm not sure why we think it's better for our young people to do 6 exams instead of 2.
Because it's when you do the exam. So you're doing the exam at the very end of your time in education of your upper 6th, right? That's right. If you change it,
do A levels, yes.
Yeah, so that's the end. So you're
in line with every single Western European country except for Wales.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. See, as you go across lean update, that means that's a one-off exam, high stakes exam. Yes.
There's 2 exams.
Well, 2 exams for the one subject. Yeah. Right.
In
so if you're studying, say, politics, and we think politics changes an awful lot in a week, when you go back to, say, Brexit, and you learned a wee bit about what you were going to do in that curriculum in September, October, you'd sit that exam in December under the AAS. Now you would have to then continuously learn all the way through that to bring you to then that upper sixth part of it, and that what you learned then could change significantly. So then more pressure is put on the teacher to then teach what has changed in all of that time.
Politics is a very specific subject.
No, but it matters. It matters. You're talking about changing it. So I'm just using that as an example because we are politicians and we're sitting in the education committee. I'm not wrong in what I'm saying. And this is where it boils down to then the pressures that you're going to put on to our young people. That's what young people tell me, and particularly those who are really interested in politics, study politics. And they get that. They understand right now, if they set an exam this Christmas under AS, or January AS.
I'm taking AS exam at Christmas, just to be really clear on
sorry,
that.
this summer. I never said AS, sorry. So in summer. So everything they have learnt in lower sixth, they sit that part of it in, isn't that right?
Yes, that's right.
So if you were studying it and then you have to put all of that on to the year after, so it's all that extra pressure of learning and keeping up to date, you're putting a lot more pressure and workload on a teacher to then keep updating them to what may have changed. And I use Brexit at the start for a very specific reason. It changed every single day. Imagine doing that over a 2-year period. It would be almost impossible. But that's what young people are saying. That's what school leaders are saying. But we also have newcomer children that come here to learn. A modular assessment and coursework allows them to break down those barriers and help them achieve
it's
qualifications.
It's a fair question. I'll just take a wee bit of time to answer it. I suppose just to say, in terms of newcomer children, if you think about a linear approach, it does give them significant extra time for language acquisition before they have to take the exams. With modular, they're having to take the exams with a lower level of language acquisition.
Removing the coursework part of it, the assessment, that's a core part of it.
There's no evidence to say that particular groups do better in coursework, so there's no evidence to say that. The evidence doesn't support that. Newcomers, children from socioeconomic disadvantage don't do better in coursework, and they don't do better for the reason
there's no evidence. How do you stand over a statement that there's no evidence of that?
We don't get higher outcomes.
That's Suzanne answer the question, and we'll have to draw.
There's no coursework doesn't produce higher outcomes for any specific socio-economic group, any particular gender, any particular group like newcomers. It doesn't work like that. The piece about coursework is actually children from more affluent backgrounds tend to get much more support, home support with coursework. That's why actually in 2009 we removed as much coursework as possible and went to controlled assessment. Controlled assessment is different from coursework because much of it's done under what are called high control conditions. So when we talk about removing controlled assessment, it's things like writing an English essay under exam conditions.
That was coming across from the young people I engaged with. And just one final point, because you said that they were a part of it. To be honest, they were an afterthought, because you only had a child-friendly consultation after it was raised by children's rights advocates. So it's not been, they weren't very much at the core of what you're thinking when you were putting it together.
Just to say, with 4,500 responses from young people, but also apart from that, in the 3,500 responses we had the main consultation, 15% of them were for young people. So I think there's been a huge level of engagement with young people. We've met with groups, SSU and I and others will be doing more young people engagement. So absolutely, young people are front and centre in terms of engagement.
The front and centre, but it won't see later day. I'll be honest.
I'll have to draw a line at that stage. John,
when's that analysis coming out?
Apologies, Deputy Chair, but I was just about to bring John in there.
Sorry. It was just a
happy to answer
if there's a quick point of fact.
We'll do that. The analysis will be out in January.
No problem. Thanks.
John, you're next.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do think the AS levels is something that I do struggle with, the removal of it. I just hear so many people say that they haven't made up their minds yet as to what they want to do, and it does give a bit of extra flexibility. I think that's something you've heard from other people. I've heard that directly from pupils.
Yeah, I suppose just to say on that, the number, it only gives extra flexibility if the children do 4 AS levels. The vast majority of learners, particularly in the non-selective sector, don't do 4 AS levels, and even many of our selective schools have really moved away from 4 AS levels because of the extra pressure and burden that places on young people. So it's only a factor if they're a child who's done 4 AS. Most children, that's not a factor.
Yeah. But I think there is an advantage. Would you not agree that if you have the AS, you've got something banked?
You also bank a very poor mark. And that's why we have a significant amount of resits.
I'd finished the question.
Sorry.
Because if there's something happens in your life, and let's say someone who's got a very difficult home life, domestic violence, social and economic poverty, having something banked in case some adverse incident happens is particularly important. You not agree?
Well, I think there's a couple of pieces, and I'll bring Karen in, but obviously poor performance and something happening in your home life can happen before you sit an AS exam as well, so that can have an impact, and then the child, has to resit. But there are all the awarding organisations through the organisation JCQ have special circumstances. So, for example, if there's a death in the family or a child's ill or unwell, there's a system where they can get a predicted mark for if they miss a paper and things like that. So there are really strong arrangements in place for circumstances like that through the awarding bodies.
I'm for death, because a death's a death. And in my experience in the police service many years, domestic violence is often not talked about. The arguing, poverty, the addictions, dad coming in late at night and shouting and screaming is not something that is often picked up upon. And that's my concern, that I just think that AS and removing it just makes it higher stakes towards the end. I just do think that there is I'm not convinced that one's particularly thought through.
I think the issue in terms of the AS, what we're really, there's a few things we're really concerned about that have happened with the AS, and maybe just helpful if I run through them. One is the teaching time that I've mentioned, young people missing 8 weeks quite often of teaching in May and June of their year 13 year. That's 8 weeks that they could be in the classroom learning. The other piece in terms of the AS is that it leads to so many examinations, so many of our A levels, because of the AS being there as well, there's 6 exams across the 2 years, which is a significant amount. Another piece that we've been concerned about for a number of years is schools using AS qualifications and not allowing learners then to continue into year 14. So there's been this history of learners not being allowed to continue with their qualification. The department has strongly advised schools not to do that it's inappropriate, that it's a 2-year course, but many schools have refused to let children continue into year 14 of their course because that power sits with the boards of governors, so it has been used in that way. So that is a concern. So look, there are concerns. That's not to say many young people aren't supportive of the AS. They absolutely are, and there are pros and cons. Of course there are pros and cons to modular and linear. One of the things we want to do in the engagement over the next number of weeks is to look at those issues more deeply with young people and with practitioners, and then come to a considered suite of proposals. That's one of the key reasons why we have a public consultation, is to make sure that we understand what people's views are on them.
100%. I'm putting that on the record, if you like. It's not in any way adversarial. One more question, and then just a final comment. If we remove the speaking and listening component from GCSE English, how will we be able to track pupils' ability to communicate effectively in the modern workplace? Because I am finding that a lot of young people are speaking, no fault of their own, in kind of lingo, sometimes TikTok lingo.
Huge issue. And LinkedIn, for example, had said that speaking is one of the most highly valued skills for employees, and yet one of the poorest skills that people are emerging with. The literacy framework actually that we published yesterday, huge emphasis on oracy, and the fact that oracy and oral language skills, they underpin every aspect of the curriculum. You can't read and write until you can speak properly. It's a fundamental and foundational skill. So I think the piece that you're making is we have to separate the idea of the importance of teaching, of speaking and listening within the curriculum, and how we assess it. So the assessment and mark it. So the proposal was that we would move to some sort of endorsement of speaking and listening, where young people had to spend a certain amount of time or a certain number of hours on speaking and listening activities, but there wouldn't be a mark that would contribute, because there's a real difficulty in marking it in a manner that's consistent and coherent.
I asked someone to rate something recently.
Brief final comment, John.
Honestly, when I asked them to rate it, they came up with this TikTok thing, 6 or 7. Honestly, 6 or 7. I was like, sorry? And they actually thought that was a
John, we need to bring it to a conclusion a little bit, moving beyond TikTok. Very brief final comment.
Need to make RC a central feature of the curriculum right through from the early years, right through primary, right into
comment from John, if you have one, other than...
Just on the social... I do agree that higher socio-economic background, higher education attainment, but one thing is that that's why we should try and grow our economy, whereas some of policies would bankrupt it, and we'd all be worse off. But that was a general comment on politics.
Comment made. I'm going to bring
like Venezuela.
David, you'd indicated next.
John secured his viral status tonight with the 6-7. But
the economy's so bad in Venezuela, Trump wants to take it over.
You're currently eating into David's time here.
Sorry. Thanks very much. I guess just a comment to say, I think as well the pressure that pupils feel, looking back on my own time, and it was disrupted by illness and so on. But I felt the pressure of deadlines for coursework and so on, sitting up late at night, all-nighters to try and get things in on time. Whereas it just depends on what kind of young person and what they're suited to, where they feel the pressure. I don't think you'll suit everyone in that regard in any case. Could I ask just, you answered a lot of the questions with your particular final bit of your discussion there, but could I ask, in terms of the threat that AI poses, are you aware of any other system in the world that is successfully grappling with AI in another way that ensures that pupils are not just learning to add flair and rehash what ChatGPT and others put up to them, but also but it is ensuring that they're developing those critical thinking skills and articulation skills?
Yeah, it's a really important point about. I think about that idea of digital literacy, which is really, really important. We've long had reading and writing as key skills, but digital literacy is really important. It's really important that we teach our young people to be critical consumers of social media, of digital technology, and effective users of AI, and that is a really important issue. It's one of the reasons why in the curriculum reform measures, something that is bespoke to Northern Ireland particularly, is that we're going to have a new area of learning throughout primary and post-primary on digital technology. That's going to be a new feature. That's not a feature of the current curriculum. There is no area of learning on digital technology because it's so important that we teach our young people. One of the pieces in the literacy framework that we published yesterday was that piece about the best way to help young people as well around AI and all of that is to make sure they have really strong foundational skills in RSC and in reading and in writing, because in that way they become critical consumers. They're able to tell the difference between fake news and other news and all that. So we have to still get all of those foundational skills right. But that new digital technology area of learning, I think, is a really, really key aspect to ensuring that our young people are strong users of things like AI, and it's such an important issue.
AI can be such a wonderful tool.
It's a fantastic
and
tool.
You can't change the world that we're in now, but it does give that challenge to the integrity of exams and all of that. Yeah. I'll move on just because in terms of time restraints. How do we make sure in giving this new emphasis and focus to our exam system that we also don't ingrain further the idea that university is the gold standard that everyone must aim at in a modern world where there's a plethora of options and often other options that are better for different sectors?
Yeah, and I'll bring Karen in on this, but I just reflect generally, like we have a journey in this country about parity of esteem for academic and vocational pathways. It is an issue, and I think in terms of qualification, there is a confusion in the qualifications that are the vast array of qualifications that are around in the vocational side. So we don't award any vocational qualifications in Northern Ireland because the market isn't big enough and it's not affordable or sustainable. So we're relying on that market. We have a whole plethora. We have T levels. We had BTECs. BTECs have been a fantastic qualification, enabling a lot of social mobility for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. We now have the proposals under the Francis report to introduce new V levels, which would be equivalent to 1A levels. It's clear to say that parents and employers and even young people themselves aren't always clear on the relative value of different vocational qualifications and what the progression routes are through from level 2, level 3 and onwards, into particularly where there's a dearth in the economy around higher level technical skills.
As a defender of academic selection and of grammar schools, some of that is because there is a focus in some of those schools on numbers getting to university, numbers getting to Oxbridge and so on. So you commented as well on the schools. It was interesting to hear that there's schools allowing people to take ASs with no intention of allowing them to progress. Is that linked to also schools vanity, I would say, around results and not wanting, if someone isn't doing that well in their AS, they don't want them going on and damaging the end result for the school in that result.
This really would be brief response.
Yes, certainly. It's not all schools, and I just want to really emphasise that many schools are very supportive of young people. But yes, there has been some issues where concern about grades and outcomes have led to children not being allowed to finish their course.
Yeah, and there is always a concern that that's about the way that we measure performance and how a school may appear. Now,
I think that is a culture that we have to grapple with.
That's it, and I think another cultural piece as well is you talked about, the progression into university. Things change very slowly, but one thing that you do see now is a much greater call for apprenticeships and higher level apprenticeships as a progression route for young people. The V levels that Suzanne mentioned there is coming from DFE in England, looking at post-16 provision, and you can see you can understand why they're going that way, because we have a similar thing. We have A levels, we have larger size qualifications that are very occupational, but we also have these kind of vocational pieces, a lot of them in the middle, and people are unclear. They have different contents, they have different grading scales. What they're saying is this should be like a suite of qualifications, V levels, branded as V levels, not as the awarding organisation, equivalent to one.
Greater clarity then.
So greater clarity about the pathway that you're following and where that might lead, and they will be more employment sector based. So that if you're not sure what you want to do, stay broad, do a mixture of A levels and V levels. If you're very sure about your occupational route, do something that's
we'll need to just draw to a conclusion there.
Thank you very much.
I imagine the V-level issue is something we'll pick up possibly around the 16 to 18 piece and what that landscape's going to look like. But
we're
I will have to
we're working with DFE, and just make one comment.
Very brief
just
here.
Karen and the team are doing a lot of important work with DFE collaboratively around careers, and so the two departments have a joint action plan and have published, and I think that's really important in terms of the parity of vocational qualifications as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Didn't feel like it cut you off, Karen, as it's your first opportunity to contribute. So thanks for referencing those V levels, and we will pick that issue up. Michelle, if you want to come in.
Thank you. Again, these are questions based on things that have been raised with me that people are concerned about. Some of them are really operational. So one that's been raised is around predicted grades, that AS levels give, I guess, really objective data to be used for a predicted grade for their UCAS forms. What will replace that now? Is it just schools and make a subjective kind of guess at that?
A couple of things about predicted grades, and I might bring Johnny in on it, but it's just to say predicted grades, even with AS, are notoriously out of step with final grades. They're actually normally 2 grades higher on average than the final grades that are awarded. So there's huge problems around predicted grades, and they're not reliable and they're not statistically strong. So I'm not sure, because the AS grade is quite often not the predicted grade that's given for a young person.
What will change now? Anything? Like, how will they do it? How will they generate those?
I would imagine they would do what has previously happened, and teacher assessment using tracking tests and internal data, of which there should be sufficient.
Is that more reliable usually, or?
Well, in terms of the AS level covers 40% of the specification, and there is a step up in terms of rigour and challenge as a student moves, as you know, to that second year. So it isn't always the best predictor. So obviously other jurisdictions as well manage without a modular system and are able to facilitate student access to university and undergraduate studies anyway.
And the other piece about the AS is, I think we've got to remember, for a lot of children don't perform strongly at AS, that they may get a D or an E or even a U grade, and there is an issue there then in terms of the predicted grades as well.
Mm-hmm. In terms of kids with special educational needs, obviously a lot of concerns raised that the linear approach will disadvantage those children, that they won't be able to perform as well as they could otherwise with the more staged approach with the modules. So can you give us some information or some reassurance to those families, because that's probably the greatest amount of concern that's been raised about the changes that you're bringing in?
I suppose I just emphasise 2 points. One is that there are a wide range of adaptations in all public exams that are available for children with special educational needs, access requirements, and none of that will change. And I absolutely want to give that unequivocal reassurance to those families today. The other piece, and just in terms of special educational needs and children with special educational needs and any potential move from modular to linear, is that the research evidence doesn't suggest that there's a differential outcome between them. And the other piece is that I talked about earlier, with comparable outcomes, and SIA control the award. So it's not that outcomes are going to decline if there was a change in assessment measures. That's absolutely not the scenario at all in these circumstances.
In terms of the cost, what's the differential between the system that we have now and the system that you're going to bring in?
So we haven't done a full cost analysis, but I can give you some pieces about the likely differences in cost in some of the strains. So at the minute we are running, in terms of GCSEs, 3 series, November, February and summer. Children in year end, there's resits, there's a whole AS series as well. So all of that requires exam paper development, it requires markers, and all the associated costs with that. So there is a significant cost piece there in terms of what it costs to run the modular system and the AS. But I do want to emphasise that these proposals are not primarily driven by cost savings. They're driven by sound proposals in terms of the evidence of what way we want to operate our exam system, but there are potential cost savings for the hugely overstretched education budget that the Chair talked about earlier in terms of reducing the number of exams. And I suppose it's a question for all of us collectively. Do we think that money spent on running lots and lots of exams, on having 6 sets of exams for some A levels, on running an AS series, on running series in November and February and the markers and all of that, do we think that's the best use of precious educational resource? And if we agree as a system it is,
what would be
it's acceptable.
Do you know the cost to implement the changes that you're going to bring in?
So in terms of the specification reviews, we have a costed plan in terms of SIA, but I suppose just to be clear about specification review, it's not an optional piece regardless of the policy framework. So even if we stayed with modular exams, AS, and every single piece stayed the same, we would still need to review our specifications. Ofqual require review of specification normally every 5 to 6 years. It's in legislation, it's the law that SIA must review and update specifications. The costs of that are exactly the same regardless of whether we keep modular, whether we keep the grading, whether we keep AS, that's exactly the same cost. So there are costs associated, of course, but it's a legal requirement and it's a regulatory requirement. I just want to emphasise that.
Final comment from Michelle then to draw that to a close.
SIA's role in all of this, how involved are they with these changes and are they supportive of the direction of travel?
So
a brief answer to this.
Yeah, so we've had significant engagement and liaison with SIA over the proposals. I think there are significant concerns in SIA around the long-term sustainability of the modular system. They have really struggled in key subjects to get enough markers to mark exam papers, and that has become absolutely critical. They've really, there's a real issue there. The issue of resits, they're concerned about the fact that the numbers taken resits can bake in an unfairness because there's a third of people resitting, which impacts on those who are taking it first time at AS, because that has an impact on the outcomes. So absolutely, the key piece is that the policy framework that is set by the Minister will then be used by SIA regulation to develop principles for the review of specifications, and that would be taken forward by SIA as an awarding organisation. So significant engagement, and SIA is strongly supportive of the approach proposed by the Department.
Thank you.
Members, that no other indications, so that brings your
Thank you very much.
evidence session to an end. Thank you all for your time today, and obviously we'll hear when we start seeing some of the outworkings of that consultation coming
and
through.
just to say, we'd be more than happy to come back and brief you when we do get to that stage of publishing the outcomes in January and then the final proposals. Be more than happy to do that.
They'll be interested in that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any actions arising from either of those briefing sessions before we move on, Danny?
Just a wee quick information. So see, as Transform Ed in its entirety then, we do have to debate this in the chamber and there's votes on it, or is this a minister going to make a policy change? I was a wee bit confused in that evidence, sir.
I think there's a lot of the aspects of Transform Ed, is clear to me, are operational. There are some elements, so for instance the new curriculum will be subject to regulation, so that will need Assembly approval, but lots of other interventions, I think it was quite clear, are operational.
Yeah, that's the thought, yeah. That's it.
Okay.
Sure. Could we seek clarity on the issue that Cathy rose in regard to Christine Council? And I know Suzanne said that SIA supplies the materials here, but is there any possibility at all that SIA might source some new materials from Christine Council's company or the company she's involved in? Can we get a cast iron guarantee that that's not going to happen?
Content we ask the question if members are content.
Sure, I'm happy to have that question asked. I think we should be very clear that what was being talked about there, just in case it muddies the waters, I don't think there was any ethical case to answer that's been raised yet. I understand the point that the Deputy Chair is raising, but I think we should be very clear that whatever was being talked about there, I didn't see any ethical issues in it at the moment.
Well, and I have no difficulty with that. The difficulty here is that we're not asking these questions, we're being asked the question. You know, is there a conflict of interest here with Christine Council sitting on that curriculum review? And, you know, we might as well clear it up now,
I think
rather than let this narrative gather wings if it, continues. So
I'm certainly content it's appropriate to seek that clarity, and obviously it's for each individual member to stand over any particular assertions they make or don't make. So that's I think that's absolutely fine. Okay.
Christine has been in touch earlier in the meeting just to offer to come on the 11th of March because I was trying to schedule her. So she would like this to go in correspondence beforehand. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, members, so we should be moving on to item 10, but we do have the consultation document to deal with. So we have hard copies, or if you do have the most up-to-date version of table papers, it's page 124 in your pack. So I'm going to encourage members to raise any particular issues where they want to see an amendment or a change quickly as possible. I'm content with the survey as stands. I think there's obviously always scope to thin things out. But happy to hear from members, but I think we would need to reach a decision fairly quickly on this.
Chair, I'm suggesting we'll remove 2 and 3, and those other amendments that I suggested, rather than do you think girls should be allowed the choice? Do you think girls should have the right? And it's there in a number of the
if I could just respond then, hope maybe if there is agreement on that. I have no issue certainly removing questions 2 and 3. I don't think there's any substantial loss or gain from those being in there. In terms of that issue of the right, could I maybe suggest we use the phrase the right to choose to wear trousers, so that it's clear we're wanting to offer choice, but that it is the right to choice. So if members are content with that language.
And just in terms of 2 and 3, I mean, question 5 covers most of those issues, I think.
I would agree.
I agree.
Any other issues?
It's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I don't think there's any reason to remove it. I think that if anything, I think if you get to the end and it delivers what you're trying to deliver, what you actually do is you show the amount of people that it's helping or it's assisting in that way. So, I mean, I'm not going to push vote, but I minded to oppose it. But I mean,
but I'll be completely clear. I have no strong feelings really either way. I would be reasonably satisfied that question 5 gives a lot of pretty clearly disaggregated data. Is that the right phrase? I'm not a statistician. That we can break down to help inform the policy position. If we do want to divide on it, we can do that. But it's probably better now to reach consensus on this. So just to check, David, are you making
No, it's okay. I'll not push the vote. I don't think it's. I guess my point is just to articulate, because I have raised it.
Yes.
I don't think it's a particularly burdensome or detailed survey. So I think collecting some of that information is not necessarily a bad thing. I guess from my point of view, the reason I'm not pushing the vote to articulate that is that this is a bill really that we wouldn't be pushing for anyway. But I don't think it's not going to change the outcome. I just thought for those actually pushing for the bill, it would have been useful information to have. But on that basis, I'm not going to push it to a vote.
Easy fix to this bill.
Yeah, well, we'll possibly not open that can of worms at this hour, but yes. So
you get it done this weekend.
There are definitely quick ways this can be delivered.
Save everybody time.
Not within this committee's gift. So, look, to round it off, we do need to make a decision. I want to be clear. I think, you know, there's an argument that questions 2 and 3 add something to it. I think there's also an argument in making sure we come back with manageable amounts of material that we reduce the content down. So I'm not going to, you know, object to the proposal. Are we agreed on that in the interest of finding consensus then?
Agreed.
Okay. That takes us on to item 10 on the
Just
agenda.
before we move on.
Yes, you certainly can.
When will this go out?
The 12th. The 12th of
12th.
December. Yeah. So that is the
Friday.
Of this week.
Yeah.
And it'll be back on the 20th of February.
Perhaps to I was going to say, should I maybe just get that formally agreed of the date it goes out so that we can just...
So those timelines were agreed, I think, last week.
Last week. So, yeah.
And in terms of reference that we talked about earlier, the legislative objective is to make provision securing the right for pupils to wear trousers to school if they choose, no matter the school, and then the outcomes do reference girls, as the survey does, if that's okay.
Okay, so that is all agreed and resolved, so that will be going out on Friday, the 12th of December. Item 10, members, is the Education Pupil Reporting Amendment Regulations NI 2025. It's an SL1, it's in your packs at page 231, that's in table papers. So the purpose of the statutory rule, as set out by the Department, is to remove the requirement for principals to provide a specific end of key stage assessment level of progression for each pupil at the end of key stages 1, 2 and 3 in their annual report to parents. This has been introduced because the Department is bringing in a system level sample assessment in literacy and numeracy to be conducted among a representative sample of pupils in their final year of key stages 1, 2 and 3. And the Department's position is that the outcomes will therefore not be available for all pupils. The statutory rule as presented to us is going to be subject to draft negative resolution before the Assembly. The Examiner of Statutory Rules has not reported on the technical aspects of the rule as yet, and there would be the option that we defer consideration until that has been received. The Department is not consulted on the rule, and members may be aware that there are new processes coming into effect from the 5th of January which add substantial additional layers of scrutiny to SL1s, so this is going to be before that, but you know, we are dealing with it under the provisions we currently have. So happy to hear views from members. I have to be honest, I'm not completely clear how substantial a change or otherwise this is, and I think on the fact that we're not clear, I would want to propose that we do seek a briefing from the Department just to understand exactly what the proposal is going to deliver and what the rationale is. I do think we should wait to hear from the Examiner of Statutory Rules before we reach a decision. The new processes coming in the new year will require much more substantial public engagement, so I think at the very least to hear how the Department has engaged with relevant stakeholders on this would be the minimum level of scrutiny I'd want to apply to this. So unless there are any other views on that, are we content to agree that approach?
Agreed.
Great. Okay, item 11 then, members, correspondence, pages 240 to 315 of your packs, and then in your table papers also. So summary note at page 240, usual approach, other than anything that requires a decision or discussion, it'll be as per the summary note. Item 11.2, page 241, it's a response from St. Louis Grammar School regarding the ongoing concerns about delivering their new build project on time and to budget. Very sympathetic to this. I have visited the school, and I mean the project is very much needed, but I think probably there's not a huge amount more we can do other than to forward that response from the school to the Department and ask for their reply to that if members are agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Item 11.3, page 242, response from the EA regarding sustainable drainage system. This information was requested in relation to the Committee for Infrastructure's consideration of the Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill. Are we content to forward that response to the Committee for Infrastructure? Agreed. Item 11.5, page 275, it's correspondence from the Department regarding its consultation on its attendance matters strategy. I would propose that we note, but I would just want to highlight that we might seek clarity from the Department on this. The date on the Department's website and the letter differ. We have a consultation on one closing on the 26th of Feb, and that's in the letter, and then on the website it's the 6th of March, so it might be worth just seeking clarity on that, but other than that I propose we note. You agreed?
Agreed.
Item 11.6, page 311, correspondence from an individual about grief education and bereavement support for children and young people. I had the opportunity to engage with this teacher at the Children's Commissioner event last month, and she really did speak very passionately about how important grief education is in the curriculum, and I think it would be appropriate to invite her to take part in the committee stakeholder event planned on the curriculum review, if members are agreed.
Great.
Item 11.7, page 313, correspondence from the Committee for Finance providing an update on the Department of Finance's review of arm's length bodies. Are we content to note?
Note.
Item 11.8, page 315, correspondence from the Committee for Finance providing revised information on outrun and forecast. I think we agreed quite substantive correspondence to go to the Department on financial matters earlier in the meeting, so I think on that basis we should note, but obviously we'll await the responses coming back from that if we're agreed. Agreed. Item 11.9, page 48 of tabled papers, response from the Minister of Education regarding concerns around children reported as unaccounted for in the school system by the Education Authority. Are any views anyone wants to highlight on this, or are we content to note? Michelle?
No, I'll just obviously have a particular interest in this area. I know it noted in the letter that there was a misreporting of the numbers, but I don't think that's the issue. The issue is that kids were missing, we didn't know, and there are significant gaps in our system still around that, and that's a real safeguarding concern. So I'm just checking, are we getting briefed on that, particularly children missing education, or even just the new EWS?
We are working towards getting an EWS briefing.
EWS is more likely to come.
Yes.
Whereas it's going to come, I think, before the policy side from the department.
So the EA service is due to come in. We haven't a date nailed down yet, but they are the organisation to speak to that. So if you're content,
no, that would be great.
Yeah, and we can maybe make it clear when we're seeking the briefing on that children missing in education is an area that we're keen to hear about.
Thank you.
Okay, members otherwise content to note. Agreed. Item 11.10 in table papers. It's a response from the EA on the issues with the building at Sandalford Special School. Notwithstanding that it has been a horrendous process for those children and their families, they are now an alternative accommodation. Other than that, are we content to note? Agreed. And then our members content, there was one other issue raised in the meeting, that there had been a media request around the correspondence in your table papers on the EA's savings plan. And I don't have any objection to sharing that information. It wasn't marked as restricted. Are members content that that's shared with the journalist who's expressed an interest? Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Other than that, are we agreed to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note, page 240? Agreed. Okay. Forward work programme. Again, time is going to beat us to have a detailed discussion, but on the 7th of January we are looking to have one of the strands in that meeting of a short strategic planning session, so we'll have an opportunity to look at forward work planning in just that wee bit more detail there. And so I think other than that, I would propose we would note at this stage, if members are agreed, and endorse the programme as drafted. Agreed. And item 13, any other business? Sigh of relief, no other business. So that moves us on to item 14, and that's date, time and place of next meeting. And everyone will, I'm sure, be very glad to know that is scheduled for Wednesday the 7th of January, 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And I'll put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Great.